Sometimes it's just something you never imagined because crashes are so rare.
Hey, Bob, with a full tank of fuel in the early stages of a flight, how difficult would it be for a pilot to control this aircraft if a problem arose?
Well, with an engine-out situation, all planes are certified so that they can fly just in the case of this plane, it has two engines, so they could fly on one engine. But nonetheless, if an engine goes out, it's a tricky little issue there to offset the fact that you've got all the power of the plane coming off a single engine now, and it sets up a kind of an asymmetrical sort of situation, and you have to balance for that with the other instruments of the plane so that you head the plane in the direction it's meant, keep it going straight out. So again, it is a very tricky maneuver, but pilots are trained in it. They train in the simulator for that all the time, and it's a very common training exercise.
All right, Bob, thanks very much. We're going to be back with you in literally just a few seconds, so stand by. Thanks, Bob. Good morning. It is 10 o'clock here in the east, 10 a.m., 7 a.m. in the west, and we're looking at pictures of an American Airlines Flight 587 that has crashed shortly after takeoff, we're told, from John F. Kennedy Airport here in New York. We know that it was an A300. It was an American Airlines Airbus en route to the Dominican Republic, to Santo Domingo, that was supposed to leave at around 8 o'clock this morning, Matt.
The actual departure time was 8 o'clock. It ended up taking off at about 9:15 Eastern time and went down just a short distance from John F. Kennedy International Airport in a section of Queens known as the Rockaways. It has apparently struck several structures on the ground there. We have reports that at least 4 buildings are on fire. We do not know at this moment how many people were on board that Airbus, a capacity of almost 200 people if it were full.
Right, but it's unclear, since many people are not flying, if it was filled to capacity. JFK has been closed, as has LaGuardia and Newark Airport. Mayor Rudy Giuliani is on his way to the scene. Emergency crews are racing there. Probably some have arrived already. This took place around 9:15 this morning, somewhere between 9 and 9:15. Officials are saying they don't think it's terrorist related, but of course it's a bit early to make that judgment.
And we should also say that senior intelligence officials are not taking any chances because of the events of September 11th. So as a precaution, they're treating it as a possible terrorist event. They've closed subways. They've closed all 3 major metropolitan areas in the New York City area. They've closed some bridges as well. That's
right, all 3 airports. Bob Hager is standing by. Of course, he is our aviation expert. Bob, what can you tell us about this crash?
That it was an A300, Airbus A300 of the 600 series, so sometimes that gets called an A306. At its maximum configuration, it can carry 266 passengers, but as you point out, in these days when planes have been going out at an average of 65% full already, you would expect fewer than that, and on its way to the Caribbean, you might expect even less than that. American is the main U.S. carrier down to the Caribbean. It's unclear at this point whether this happened just as the plane was lifting off. By the location of the plume of smoke there close to the water and close to Kennedy Airport, which sits not far from the water there in Queens. From the location, you might think that it went down immediately as it was lifting off, but on the other hand, we don't know yet if it had got some distance out. I say that because I was seeing something off the computer that's conflicting that indicates that it might have got a little way out before this occurred, in which case that would envision a scenario where it was turned around and it's on its way back, but that doesn't jive with the early reports that the plane did not call back and indicate trouble.
I was going to say, Bob, apparently an eyewitness has been saying that the left side, there seemed to be a fire on the left side of the aircraft. Would that indicate anything to you?
Well, sometimes if there's an engine problem, you can see it. Ordinarily, in the case of an engine fire, it's internal to the engine and you don't see it. But there are various scenarios where an engine fire can cause flame to stream out of the engine. Again, we made the point a little bit ago that these planes are certified if one engine goes out to fly on the other engine. But as we saw with the Concorde crash, oftentimes it's just not manageable and gets out of hand.
What kind of track record does this particular aircraft have, Bob?
I frankly, I think it has a good track record. There's one of those Airbus models that had a series of accidents, and I'm not certain if this is that yet. I know through the years there was controversy about Airbuses because it's a much more automated system. They call it fly-by-wire, which really means that there are less hydraulics in it and more electric wires to control the systems, and it's a very automated aircraft. And on takeoff, you might have it set for an automatic takeoff and automatic lift out. And sometimes pilots used to complain about it being too automatic, but that was some time ago. That controversy was a decade or more ago, and more recently all that has quieted down. And in any event, we know so little about what might have caused that, that sort of speculation is probably not useful at this point.
All right, Bob, we just want to mention again, emergency crews are on their way, some probably at the scene right now. Mayor Giuliani on his way to the scene as well, because obviously there's concern not only for the people aboard that aircraft, but for the people on the ground in that residential area as well. Bob Hager. Bob, thank you very much.
All right, let's go back to the Pentagon now. Washington, Jim Miklaszewski is standing by on the phone. Jim?
Matt, there are early indications that the FAA, that the ground controllers at John F. Kennedy, apparently knew that American Airlines Airbus was having some kind of difficulty. Don't know exactly what. But according to U.S. officials that we've talked to just a few minutes ago, the FAA was reporting that there was a loss of communications with that Airbus shortly after takeoff. Now, what could have caused that is anybody's guess at this point. But the FAA did believe that there was some kind of difficulty shortly after takeoff with that American Airlines Airbus, but did not realize the degree of difficulty, according to officials, until the plane had actually crashed. There were combat airplanes, the Combat Air Patrol, constantly being flown over the New York City area. They were in the air at the time, but those airplanes, those fighter jets, were not warned of any difficulty with this flight before it went down. Still a lot of unanswered questions, but again, apparently the FAA was aware that this plane was having some kind of difficulty.
Mick, here's a question I don't know if you're able to answer, but the flight was supposed to take off at 8 o'clock from JFK. It didn't take off till 9:15. Is there any way to find out whether that delay was caused by just air traffic or whether there was a mechanical problem that they were working on with that plane?
All those kinds of answers would have to come from the FAA. We're only dealing here with what's going through the military. And of course, the military, since September 11th, has been flying these combat air missions over several key cities, including New York, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So as soon as this plane went down, they, of course, sprung into action to figure out exactly what the military's role would have been in this incident. And so far, there is every indication that the planes were not notified, the fighter jets were not notified that this Airbus was in trouble.
All right, Mick, thank you very much. And
right.
I want to mention that we're now hearing that 246 people were scheduled to take this flight, had actually booked tickets on this flight along with 9 crew members. So the potential that 255 people were on board this plane. NBC's Dr. Bob Arnott is also a pilot. Bob, I know you're on the phone with us. Let's talk a little bit about weather. It doesn't seem as if that could have played any role in this crash.
No, Matt, last night, as you know, there was a fairly severe wind shear. Today, though, the wind's only about 4 or 5 knots, but interestingly, it's coming out of the west, and the 2 runways this plane likely would have used would have been 22 right or 22 left. Now, if you follow the flight course off of those runways, you only have about 3 miles before you hit the beach. That would mean that if, in fact, this plane has gone down just south of the airport, which is what the tower is reporting, that this came down very, very quickly, literally within a mile or 2 of takeoff. Now, if you have a catastrophic engine failure, even on rotation in one of these Airbuses, where you have what's called an uncontained failure, where parts of the fan blade make its way out through the engine compartment. That's very unusual. You would still be able to successfully take off in this airplane, come back around, make approach, and land. And so for a plane like this to come down so quickly would have to be something utterly catastrophic. Now,
however, Bob, let me interrupt. Does it give you any extra information to say that an eyewitness says that there was debris coming from the sky?
Well, it means that the plane was, of course, starting to come about in the air. And there was another eyewitness account talking about flames coming out of one of the engines. And usually, as we saw with a Concorde crash, when you have flames out of an engine, you have an uncontained failure of some kind. You've actually hit fuel lines, so that those fuel lines have ruptured and you start to see flame coming out. Or, in fact, you have had a massive sort of internal failure of the engine. You may see flames coming out of the back of the engine rather than the side of the engine, which is a little bit more likely. Now, there have been crashes, of course, of the A320 series of the Airbus, one at an air show, and there was one in Bahrain last year. So this series, the 300 series plane, does, of course, not have a perfect safety record. There have, of course, been problems with the airplane. More recent models, better fly-by-wire. Pilots at this point love the airplane, swear by them, and say that, and I've been in the simulator, if in fact you do have almost complete destruction of one engine, you can take this, fly it, make a very nice approach, and come back in and land. Now, Matt, you remember the other American plane that did crash off of Chicago a few years ago did have an engine that literally fell off, and when they tried to fly out of it, they actually flew the wrong profile, and the plane, of course, did sort of fall out of the sky. And that's apparently what happened here, that is, this is a plane that fell off out of the sky as opposed to a plane that was able to maneuver and slowly come in towards the ground and try and make a crash landing. So at this point, and Bob Hager's right, you can't speculate because it's so early on, but you're looking at what had to have been some massive catastrophic mechanical problem with this airplane.
All right, Dr. Bob Arnott. Bob, thanks very much.
You're
Stand
welcome.
by. I'm sure we'll be talking to you as we proceed.
Okay, we're going to go back to Bob Hager, who we hope has some more information for us. Bob, what can you tell us?
Simply that this crash occurred about 5 miles out from the airport. That information from Jim Miklashevsky was very interesting, where he said that they had lost communications with this plane, so they had the idea that something was up. There are some preliminary reports now that the engine may have been found in a different place from the main part where this wreckage has occurred, in which case the engine may have separated from the plane. Engines are made, if there's a seizure problem because of the torque of the engine, so that it doesn't flip the whole plane, an engine is made under certain conditions, to snap off. So that need not always be a catastrophic scenario where the engine comes off.
You can fly with one engine, correct?
Well, you can fly with the one engine, and the fact that the other one, never mind it's not running, but has completely come off the aircraft, in certain configurations, for instance, if you're at cruise altitude, you could still manage the plane with some difficulty, but it's made to come off if the engine suddenly seizes, and you still want to fly the plane without the problem of it tipping the plane over, the seizure of that engine. But the fact that it came off at this crucial moment while the plane is still under full power, if indeed it came off, with the plane on full power, still lifting off from the runway, even though it's 5 miles out, that could be a much more difficult situation for a pilot to manage. And then why in the world it would come off is just another question.
And Bob, I'm curious, how significant is it that air traffic controllers lost communication with the pilots on this plane? Normally in situations like that, wouldn't there not be some kind of distress signal or some kind of mayday coming from the pilots, so that, you know, all the people involved would at least have some sense of what's happening?
It varies. If it was so sudden and the plane suddenly goes into a dive, the crew might not have had a chance to get off a call. Otherwise, something can happen aboard the aircraft where you lose the electronics and lose the radio, even though it's something catastrophic. that didn't have to do with the radio, but you lose the radio as a consequence of it and don't have a chance to get off a call. So we just can't tell what that was about yet.
Right. Or how significant that might in fact be.
Yes.
Okay, Bob. Bob, we'll be checking back with you in just a few minutes.
Katie, there's one thing I can mention. Someone who takes flights out of Kennedy frequently and passes by that gate in the morning mentioned, and has seen this plane loading in previous cases, mentioned that it frequently goes out full, and in this case, if those reports of the passengers on board were correct, 246 passengers aboard, that is virtually full. And this person mentioned that he's seen people checking in, and because they're going down to the Dominican Republic and leaving this country, there's often just a lot of luggage. So that's another thing that can come into play on takeoff, is the weight and balance and the positioning of that luggage in the hold.
And it probably wouldn't be surprising, even for very benign reasons, Bob, that this plane might be late to leave JFK, because obviously with increased security and a lot of the immigration issues that have to be dealt with and passports, etc., sometimes that can cause delays.
Oh, I think that's almost expected these days. So yes, I'm not sure that you make anything yet out of the fact that this plane went off late. That's, you know, more or less the norm now.
All
Although
right.
at that time of the morning at JFK, a plane leaving 45 minutes to an hour late because it's such a prime time isn't really unusual either.
Right, right. All right, Bob Hager. Bob, as I said, we'll check back with you in just a few minutes. Thank you so much. Meanwhile, NBC's Andrea Mitchell has some information, sort of the intelligence side of the story, if you will. She's joining us from New York. Andrea, what can you tell us?
Katie, intelligence officials have been reviewing all of the information that comes in on a constant basis to the Counterterrorism Center at Langley. They see no warnings, no indications at all of any kind of terrorist threat other than the normal background noise. That said, they are, of course, in immediate contact with New York City officials and say that at least protectively, New York City officials have told them that they are treating this as a terrorist incident, just protectively. That is why they close all of the airports, closing subways, now evacuating the United Nations, which ironically was in a special Security Council session due to start later this morning on the subject of terrorism. As well, Colin Powell, Secretary of State, now meeting with the 6 nations that border on Afghanistan, including Iran, to discuss a post-Taliban rule and how to get a political structure in place with the rebels so close to Kabul and to other key centers. So the emphasis at the United Nations today will now be disrupted. They're evacuating the UN, we are told. And New York officials are telling the intelligence community that they are treating this as a possible terrorist incident, but there is no information from the CIA to back that up with any kind of specific warning. Katie?
All right, Andrea Mitchell. Andrea, thank you. I think that bears repeating, that it is simply sort of a cautionary reason for treating this as a terrorist event, but no indication at this juncture that that in fact is the cause. We want to mention a New York Fire Department spokesman has said that 44 units and 198 firefighters have responded to the scene. With more on the story, now here's Matt.
All right, Katie, thank you very much. We want to go on the phone as well now to Debbie Chiffo. And Debbie, I hope I pronounced your last name correctly, who is an eyewitness to the crash. What can you tell me?
I was driving on the Parkway, and I saw something fall from the back of the plane. And then the back of the plane went on fire, and then the plane started dropping, and it just went down nose first.
All right, give me an idea. When you say you're driving on the Parkway, what Parkway were you on? Where about? What town?
I was on the Belt Parkway by Flatbush Avenue.
How high was the plane when you saw it pass overhead?
It wasn't high. It was high, but not too high.
And you say you saw something fall from the plane. Did you see an explosion?
After something fell, and then I saw a fire, a small fire, and then it just started dropping, and then it went down. It started spinning and went down nose first.
Nose first. Can you give me an idea of how far from where the crash site is you were?
Maybe about 4 miles.
4 miles out, and you're still quite a distance away.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah, and then you saw the explosion. After you saw the plane go down, then it just exploded. But I don't know what it went into.
But again, you saw the plane go in nose first.
Yeah.
All right, Debbie, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
Obviously a horrifying scene, this flight 587, American Airlines, Airbus 300, with a potential of 255 people on board. That is, if all the scheduled passengers made it on board along with the crew members, has crashed, shortly after takeoff from New York's John F. Kennedy Airport, about 5 miles from the airport, 5 miles south, in the Rockaway section of Queens. We've also had reports that it hit several structures on the ground. It's an area, as Al Roker told us, of some medium-rise buildings, some single and double family dwellings. So you have to start to speculate about how many injuries or fatalities there could have been on the ground as well.
Primarily a residential area, as Al was telling us earlier. And in fact, Al lived there when he was very young, but is quite familiar with the area. Al, tell me about, we've been reporting that 4 buildings so far are on fire. Tell us about this Rockaway section and what people, you know, who lives there and what kind of buildings are there.
It's basically a working class section of Queens, as much of Queens is, and as you can see along the horizon there, just to the left of the smoke, those are low-rise buildings. These are mostly apartment buildings that are maybe 5, 10 stories at the most, some maybe a little bit higher than that, newer buildings, but it was mostly a working class vacation area at the turn of the century. So these are very small homes that were built, wooden structures, a lot of them not even winterized. They weren't winterized until after World War II. And so it's a very densely packed area.
And for people who aren't familiar with the Northeast and the New York metropolitan area, Al, we're seeing a couple of bodies of water there with the Rockaways in between. Describe what those are.
That's basically, we've got the South Bay and then the Jamaica Bay area, and then you've got the Atlantic on the other side of that. And you're talking about a very thin strip of land. It's almost akin to our version of Miami Beach. So there are very few ways off that island, that spit of island that's called the Rockaways. There's one subway elevated line, and then there are a couple of bridges. But for the most part, it's fairly isolated. And so if it's gone down there, it's very difficult for rescue teams and fire teams to get into that area because the streets are very narrow. They're very small. And as I said, these homes are very densely packed. There's a lot of commercial strips of property there as well.
We should mention that a New York Fire Department spokesperson, we mentioned this earlier, said 44 units and 198 firefighters have responded to the scene. Obviously, going to be a harrowing day for many of them. Just over 2 months, just one day over 2 months of the World Trade Center where so many firefighters and police officers lost their lives.
We should also mention that you're seeing a very distant shot of the area. You know, normally in an event like this, the news helicopters get you some kind of closer view, but because of FAA restrictions, those helicopters are not allowed to fly, especially in the area of an airport, and so we're not getting closer shots.
Let's go to Bob Arnott, Dr. Bob Arnott, who, as you mentioned, Matt, is also a pilot, who can respond perhaps to some of the things that eyewitness reported seeing. Bob?
Well, what's interesting, Katie, here is that she saw something fall off the aircraft, and as Bob Hager indicated, it may have been the engine. This is very similar to the DC-10 crash out of Chicago several years ago when the engine did fall from the airplane and the plane stalled. When you have an airplane that goes in nose first, in all likelihood that plane has stalled. And what we mean is that there is a critical altitude and critical airspeed at which a plane can no longer fly, and when it stalls, the nose tends to drop over and head towards the ground. Now, when you lose an engine like this, if it is catastrophic, you can lose the use of hydraulic lines, as we saw in the Iowa City crash with the United Airlines plane. You lose some control of the airplane. Also, if you're in a very critical attitude of flight, by attitude we mean that the plane is in a fairly steep incline as it's climbing out, you have that loss of an engine. Even though pilots are trained for this, and you can fly very successfully on just one engine, if in fact you're at a low airspeed and you have a tremendous amount of torque thrust out of that other engine, it can roll and then, of course, fall nose first down into the ground. So as we learn about this crash and perhaps the loss of this engine, catastrophic loss of the engine, fall of the engine to the ground, if in fact these reports are true, as opposed to a plane, Katie, that has exploded in flight, like TWA 800, this is a plane that seems to have gone down fairly intact, and that would seem to say that they lost aerodynamic control of the airplane. Now, one reason that you don't hear from pilots is that the rule you learn from the first day you fly is first fly the airplane. That is, there's no reason to call anybody if you're struggling to try and control the plane. You can imagine that as a plane rolls and goes into a dive like that, pilots never give up, as we saw in the case of the plane plane that crashed, the Alaska airplane that crashed off of California, to the last minute as that plane rolled over onto its back and crashed into the ocean, those pilots struggled to save the airplane. So with bells and whistles, sirens going off in the airplane, they're taking and struggling with the control column, trying to right the airplane, trying to pull it up, add the extra thrust of the other engine, trying every possible way to recover as a plane like this goes down.
Well, Bob, I'm just curious, you talk about the inability to control an aircraft of this type if one of the engines goes out, but what would cause the plane to actually stall if one of the engines was in fact operating?
What can happen is that what happened with this DC-10 crash out of O'Hare many years ago, the American crash, is that, for instance, if you lose some of your hydraulics and you have flaps or slats that are deployed, you have extra drag on the airplane.
Mm-hmm.
Also, if in trying to recover, and this happened with the American DC-10 plane, you, for some reason, are putting the plane into a configuration brings it closer to a stall, then that too makes it more difficult to recover. Now, in pilot training, and I have to do this twice every year, they put you through all these scenarios. They take an engine, they give you an engine fire, and they make it fail on takeoff. And then you have to get the nose down slightly, add power with the extra engine, try and get all the extra drag off. The gear would have already been up. The flaps should have been up. Chances are that any extra air control devices on it would have been up by about that 5-mile mark out of the airfield. But if the plane pitches up, if there's some sudden change in what we call the plane's attitude, that is, if it goes into an unusual attitude because of an upset, when you lose an engine like that, there's a sudden change in torque in the airplane, a certain swinging of the plane. And even though we practice for this, you can get into a situation where either you've lost some control because of hydraulic lines, or in a fly-by-wire plane like this, if you've lost some of the electrical connections. Now, planes have, Katie, triple, at least, redundancy. So one would hope in these new modern fly-by-wire aircraft that even if you lost a number of different systems on a plane, there should be backup after backup after backup, so you'd still be able to maintain some control over the plane. Now, we saw with a Concorde crash that when it lost those two engines on one side, that it simply didn't have enough thrust to be able to climb. It was very far behind the power curve. These A300 Airbuses, though, are designed that even if you lost complete power out of one engine, if the other engine was fully capable in flying and you were able to maintain aerodynamic control over the airplane, that you would, in fact, be able to fly it out, come around, and land. And what's so unusual here is to have it actually stall and fall out of the air as opposed to maneuvering and coming around as a crippled airplane trying to make its way back into Kennedy Airport.
Okay, and of course all this is just hypothesis based on speculation, based on one eyewitness. There's certainly lots of unanswered questions at this point in time, but Bob Arnott, we appreciate your insight. Thanks, Bob.
You're welcome, Katie.
Pete Williams is NBC's Justice correspondent. He joins us now on the phone from Washington. Pete, what are you hearing?
Matt, good day to you. No indications at this point from senior law enforcement officials in Washington that this is anything other than some kind of accident. No reports of terrorism, no indications that a crime brought this plane down. There's been no intelligence that a crash was imminent, no warnings, no threats from groups that another hijacking was planned. So absolutely no indication, and it's very early yet, but no indication at all that there was any act of terrorism or crime in bringing down this plane, Matt.
However, officials here in New York, as you mentioned, Pete, are acting just protectively, closing down all three major airports. We've had reports of subways closing and some bridges closing, tunnels closing, the river crossings here in New York. So if September 11th taught us anything, it's to be safe, not sorry. And that's the result of plans, that this is not ad-libbing. This is the result of planning that has happened since September 11th, of what would happen if another scenario like September 11th were to happen again. So you're seeing them carry out those plans that they've put in place. Many cities have similar plans if there were to be some kind of aircraft accident or occurrence like this, Matt. All right, Pete, thanks very much. Pete Williams, our Justice correspondent in Washington this morning, and now we were talking about the fact that so many firefighters and emergency rescue people are responding to this scene in Rockaway, Queens, just 5 miles from JFK, and many of these people are the same people who responded in the early moments and hours following the attacks on September 11th and went to the World Trade Center to offer any assistance they could. So as you can obviously imagine, these are rescue personnel who've seen an awful lot of misery in the last couple of months here in the New York area.
And the Rockaways are not easy to access. There are only a couple of bridges. There's a railroad bridge that goes in there, and it's just very difficult. And to make matters worse, going out to JFK Airport, the main expressway, the Van Wyck, is under construction right now. They're building an air link, a rail link from Jamaica, the Long Island Railroad Station, out to JFK. So a lot of that road at best is a bad road.
Absent that construction,
Right.
It's not a picnic trying to get in that area anyway. And of course, you'd imagine that the fire and rescue personnel from JFK are on their way to the scene. I would imagine, since the airport's closed, they can spring those people and get them out to the Rockaways, but of course they keep them close to the airfield if it does in fact reopen.
And in fact, if you look at the map, the problem with the folks who are at JFK, there's really no easy way over to the Rockaways. So it's kind of, you got to do a dogleg swing down.
Parkway.
And the Bell Parkway, again, not being an easy parkway to drive in New York City, so in that area. So it's really difficult.
We don't know a lot more than we do know, but just to recap, what we have heard so far is that this is American Airlines Flight 587, an Airbus 300 that was scheduled to depart from JFK International Airport in Queens at about 8 o'clock this morning. It eventually took off at 9:15, scheduled to be on board some 246 passengers, 9 crew members. It was en route to the Dominican Republic, Santo Domingo, when about 5 miles south of the airport, this plane crashed into the Rockaway section of Queens and apparently crashed into several structures. At least 4 buildings that we know of are on fire at this time.
Well, there's no indication this is a terrorist act, and I don't think we can emphasize that enough. Many officials are treating it as such, as a preventive and cautionary measure. For example, bridges and tunnels here in Manhattan have been closed. All 3 airports in this area, Newark Airport in New Jersey, LaGuardia Airport, and JFK, have all been closed down in the wake of this. Mayor Giuliani is en route to the scene if he hasn't gotten there already. But this is quite a distance by car, Al. It would take quite a while to get to this site from New York City.
We were talking that, you know, that in perfect conditions, it's difficult to get to on a regular basis. And on a day like today, with that kind of emergency, it's going to be very, very difficult indeed. And there are other airports, too, that we've got MacArthur Field in Long Island that's probably shut down now as well. Stewart Field, also there's the White Plains Field, the Westchester Airport. That's probably all been shut down as well, really locking up this area as far as air traffic is concerned.
Let's go back to NBC's Bob Hager, who is our aviation expert here at NBC News. Bob, any developments?
Yes, Katie, the FAA now says that they are hearing that there were 260 passengers on that plane, so that's more than we previously thought. And as you heard here, we have the one eyewitness, and I think on the wire there are reports of some other eyewitnesses who say that they saw debris. There's one unconfirmed report that the engine may have come down in a different spot from the main wreckage. So it does appear that engine or something was coming off this plane, and that's very unusual for that to occur, even in a crash. And what it indicates, it's much too early to say, but you could think about, first of all, an engine itself falling off the aircraft, or seizing, or an uncontained failure of the engine where parts spew out of the engine. You could think, too, of parts coming off of other parts of the plane as an alternative to that being the engine or a part of the engine. So if something, for instance, came off the tail section, that would be crucial and put the plane into a dive. Now, occasionally you can have parts coming off a plane from the sheer speed of the plane dropping out of the sky. But at that altitude, that would be awfully early for the plane to begin breaking up, even if it was in a steep dive.
Yeah, Bob, I was going to say, if this happened just 5 miles away from the airport, obviously the plane was not airborne for very long at all.
No, he'd be airborne only a few minutes and making his way through several thousand feet of altitude.
And air traffic controllers, I think we should just mention again, lost contact with the pilot, but there might be a very plausible explanation for that as well.
Well, something when you're in that configuration and under full power and lifting out, it's a very busy time in the cockpit anyway, and then add something catastrophic suddenly going on. and he may simply have had no time to get a call off. There's one other piece of information from the FAA. They have now put a ground stop on all traffic in a 25-mile radius, so we already knew that LaGuardia and Newark airports, in addition to JFK, were closed. This would include those airports out on Long Island and the White Plains Airport and Teterboro, so all the airports in New York are closed as a precaution. There's a prohibition on any takeoffs from any of those airports.
Okay, Bob, we'll be checking back with you momentarily, so thank you very much, Bob.
Michael Boyd is an aviation analyst. Mr. Boyd, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes, sir.
Obviously, we're going to put you in a difficult position here because we don't have an awful lot of information to give you on which you can speculate, but from what you've heard so far, what are your thoughts?
I would err on the side of mechanical failure. These airplanes are, as Dr. Arnott pointed out and Bob Hager pointed out, tremendously reliable, but they are made by the hand of man. So for the moment, let's err on the side of that.
All right, and again, I don't know whether you can see the video, but something obviously catastrophic had to happen because, as we've said, there were a couple of major bodies of water in and around the crash site, and as we all know, we've learned through tragic experiences in the past, that pilots in this country and all around the world do everything they can to avoid casualties on the ground, and this pilot was apparently unable to miss this piece of land.
Well, he probably didn't have a whole lot of altitude to play with. I'm not a pilot, but you know, I have taken off from Kennedy, and you're not too far away, so he may not have had time to really focus on that, or may not have had the option.
And may have lost hydraulics and control of the plane.
Yeah, exactly. You know, the engines on that airplane, too, are some of the most reliable. They're General Electric engines, and you just don't get them any more reliable than that. So, but everything is made by the hand of man.
All right, Mr. Boyd, thank you very much. We'll check back in with you a little bit later as well.
Thank you, sir.
Again, you're looking at the scene from quite a distance where an American Airlines flight has crashed into the Rockaway section of Queens. The smoke diminishing now. It was much thicker just a few minutes ago, but we have understood that this plane has hit several buildings which were also on fire, and we have no word on injuries or deaths on the ground. But as Bob Hager just said, a new report that up to 260 passengers were on board that plane. We don't know if that includes crew members, but we were told there were scheduled 9 crew members on the flight as well.
And again, Al Roker, being familiar with that part of Queens, it's quite densely populated. It's a very small strip of land, but a lot of people living there.
A lot of people. These are small 2- and 3-story wood structures, so a fire starts in one, many times it spreads to another. And it's Veterans Day, and a lot of kids are off from school. And so a lot of people are probably home as well.
I was just going to ask you about schools in the area and the like, and obviously that's a pretty terrifying prospect for a lot of people being on the ground. As we mentioned, we can just repeat that 4 buildings, as far as we know, are on fire. We don't know what those buildings are or what they were, what they're used for or anything along those lines.
Katie, we have another eyewitness on the phone with us right now. Her name is Eileen Horowitz. Ms. Horowitz, can you hear me? Apparently she's not. Let's swing then. We'll try and rehook up with her, and let's go back to Jim Mikoszewski in Washington. Mick, what can you tell us?
Well, Matt, I can tell you that the Pentagon's Crisis Action Team, which was stood up and remains on duty round the clock since September 11th, closely monitoring these events, but so far, and I repeat, so far, the indication is that apparently it's felt that there was no terrorist act directly involved with the crash of this airplane. That's the early reading out of the Pentagon. They say that so far it doesn't look that it will require any kind of military response to this specific incident. And again, combat airplanes were flying their air patrols over New York City as part of the Homeland Defense that was put into place after the September 11th terrorist attacks. They were not notified, had no indication that this plane was in any kind of trouble until after the crash. And as of this moment, the Pentagon is not scrambling any additional aircraft, putting any additional aircraft into the air in any other cities, including New York City, for the present time. Fighter jets all since September 11th have remained on strip alert at a number of military airstrips across the nation. They remain in that condition today on standby. But so far, the Pentagon is pretty much standing down until the investigation determines exactly what caused this crash. But as of now, they are saying there appears to be no connection to a terrorist attack as far as the current evidence indicates.
All right, Mick, thank you very much. If there is any good news in this event, it would be that it is not terrorist related. At least we'll keep our fingers crossed that that holds up.
All right, let's go back to Bob Hager. Bob, are you hearing any more about the time frame of this?
No, just sometime after 9 o'clock. I think it was about 9:15. And I'm not certain about those earlier reports that this plane was supposed to take off at 8 o'clock. I hear us reporting that, but I'm not certain that that's confirmed. And the 260 figure that we had a moment ago from the FAA, now it's uncertain whether that includes the crew or not. I think we believe that there was a crew of 9 aboard this plane. By the way, just because Michael Boyd mentioned it a few moments ago about maintenance as something to think about in this too, the crash that Bob Arnott spoke about some time ago, where a complete engine came off a DC-10 at Chicago O'Hare. That was an American Airlines flight many years ago, but that was maintenance in that case. It was when the last time the engine had been serviced and taken off the plane for servicing, and it was put back on, and it had been hit when it was put back on, and there was a bolt that wasn't secure, and the engine simply fell off on takeoff. But of all the different causes of crashes, pilot error is the one that percentage-wise causes most crashes, and then after that, maintenance and weather and some things like that are about equal.
Yeah, Bob, we're getting some information. I know it's all coming in dribs and drabs, but takeoff is thought to have been around 9:17 Eastern Time. The plane apparently crashing at 9:27, so about 10 minutes later, if these initial reports are accurate. We're also hearing that eyewitnesses and firefighters are saying that apparently a burning engine fell from the sky and crashed into a house and ignited a 3-story home and garage, along with a vehicle in the garage and a boat, and that aircraft fuel is still burning. So I guess one of the smaller fires that we saw from our shot that was quite a bit away from the scene might have been the site of that home burning as a result of that engine dropping before the actual crash took place. Bob?
There have been reports from several eyewitnesses that something was going on the left-hand side of the plane, I keep hearing, and that it involved flame. And now there's a second report, because I'd heard that earlier about the engine being in a separate place, and so that's the second time we've heard that the engine completely came off this aircraft, which is just completely unusual.
All right. Bob Hager. Bob, thanks a lot, and I will be talking with you in just a few minutes.
Let's try to connect once again to Eileen Horowitz, who is an eyewitness to the crash. Ms. Horowitz, can you hear me now?
Hello?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Tell me exactly where you were when you saw this plane go overhead.
Well, I was in my house.
How close do you live to the crash site?
1 block away.
And what did you see?
Okay, well, I didn't see anything at the precise moment when it went overhead, but I heard a noise like, I work for the Airlines. I said, gee, it's flying awfully low. And then there was a horrible rumble underneath the house, like a bomb. And then I heard people in the street running out, crying hysterically. And I ran out on my terrace, and I could see, a big cloud of smoke and people saying that there's a plane, down.
So you live a block from where the actual main section of the plane came down, not where the engine has been reported to have come down?
Well, no, I live a block away from the gas station where it looks like there's where the engine is. And by the grace of God, I'm looking at it right now, it just missed the gas tanks.
Can you tell me, have many emergency crews arrived on the scene?
Yeah, the streets are all closed up, and I'm sure you can hear them in the street now with lots of people, every possible type of emergency vehicle.
Eileen, it's Katie Couric. I'm just curious because we've been hearing about the engine, one of the engines being a different location. How far away from you is the actual plane that crashed?
Where I'm standing right now?
Yeah.
About a block and a half.
So how far a distance, Eileen, from the engine that actually caused a fire to the plane itself?
Well, the fire is where the airplane went down. Where the engine is at the gas station, and that, they have the fire trucks here, and they put everything down, everything out.
So it's not really too far away from where the engine apparently dropped near the gas station to the actual crash of the airplane itself. Okay, apparently we've just lost Eileen Horowitz, who was actually frighteningly close to the scene, or at least to where that engine dropped. And it sounds like I couldn't quite understand the distance between those two sites, but it doesn't seem as if it were very far away.
Well, I think the conflict is if we're saying the plane took off at 9:17 and the crash happened about 9:27, that's 10 minutes, and that's too long a period of time for that plane to only travel that short a distance.
Would have been out over the ocean, you'd imagine, by that time.
Yeah.
We were inside earlier.
That's right.
Yeah.
So the crash had to happen 3-4 minutes tops from the time the plane took off.
Right, because
that
it's,
distance.
as you said, 5 miles away from the airport, and these are just initial FAA reports, and of course everybody, I'm sure, is scrambling to get all pertinent information out there.
Katie, we want to go now to David Venz. We understand he is a spokesperson for Airbus. Mr. Venz, good morning.
Good morning.
What can you tell me about this particular plane?
This is an A300 airplane. It's a wide-body twin-engine airplane. It was the first type of airplane that
That's a real nice
Airbus
shot.
has built.
How old a plane would this have been, do you know?
I don't know the particular age of this airplane, but it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 to 14 years old, perhaps.
And we're hearing that perhaps 260 passengers were on board. Is that about capacity?
Yes, it is.
Can you tell me a little bit about the track record of this particular model of aircraft?
It has a great track record. The airplane has been in service for close to 30 years. This is a newer version of the airplane, but the basic model has been in worldwide service for approximately 30 years. And
It's a very popular plane, isn't it? How many would you estimate are in service with airlines in this country?
in America, there are only about 35 of them have been sold here, all to American Airlines. It has received a lot of acclaim worldwide, though, because it operates with many airlines around the world. We've built close to 600 of them.
And I know that, Mr. Venz, it's very difficult based on limited information that you've heard, but any speculation on your part as to what might have caused a catastrophic crash like this?
We would have no idea what happened, not at this point in time.
All right, David Venz, who is a spokesperson for the Airbus company, the company that manufactured this particular plane, again saying it's a wide-body flight, a plane with a possible capacity of about 260 people, so this apparently was a full flight.
All right, we're going to go to Jim Hall of the NTSB. Jim, tell us what you know right now.
Well, Katie, I am aware, of course, that the National Transportation Safety Board is mobilizing its GO team for this tragedy.
I should mention, Jim, that you're the former chairman of the NTSB, so you're not intimately involved in this investigation, but certainly well aware of what kinds of things are transpiring right now within the NTSB.
Yes, Katie, both the National Transportation Safety Board as well as Airbus and American Airlines are well structured to respond to a tragedy of this magnitude. The National Transportation Safety Board GO team is being assembled now. It will contain technical individuals with disciplines in all the possible areas of the investigation. And we will also, of course, have the family assistance team that will be put together and will be responding promptly as well.
You know, Jim, we should be very careful here. There's lots of speculation going on at this early hour, but it's very, very difficult to tell what might have transpired. Having said that, anything that you've heard so far that could give you any indication about what might have gone wrong with this flight?
Well, Katie, let me say I learned from my 7 years' experience at the board that right now I am confident watching this program are many family members and loved ones that had relatives on this aircraft. And so I think it is obviously the very responsible thing to do to not speculate at this time. Obviously, this is a tragedy that could have been caused by any number of different things that could have occurred either with the aircraft systems, with the aircraft operation, with the ground support for the aircraft, with the aircraft structure, all of these items will be looked at very carefully as part of the investigation.
And Jim, just as you say you shouldn't speculate, at this point in time, can you rule out any kind of sabotage or terrorist action as being the, responsible for this event?
Katie, I think obviously looking at this in the light of September 11th, we have to look very closely at every possibility. And that would include any type of sabotage of the aircraft as well. So the National Transportation Safety Board coordinates very well with the criminal authorities on each and every major aviation accident. So that coordination will be taking place as well. As the board has done previously, if we find any evidence that this is caused by a criminal act, the investigation would be passed then to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and to the appropriate criminal authorities. But I would assume now that Marion Blakey, who is the new chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board, will be moving forward to investigate this as an aviation accident and to use the existing protocols that the National Transportation Safety Board has in place, working very closely, of course, with the aircraft manufacturer, with the airline itself, as well as some of the system manufacturers of the system components. I do not know, I have not heard reported exactly what the engines, power units on this aircraft are, but it is quite normal for that organization also to have representatives participate in the investigation, along with the avionics system representatives.
You're smart to try to avoid speculating, because jumping to conclusions is a very risky proposition.
Well, and particularly right now, Katie, when our aviation system has experienced so much tragedy and so much shock, we have the safest system in the world. The system has been built very carefully, and I think the American people can be very proud of the structure that we have in place with the National Transportation Safety Board, the Federal Aviation Administration, our manufacturers. We have worked very hard each and every day, both in the public and private sector, to protect the safety of America's flying public.
But Jim, you must know as well as I do, with nerves on edge and people very reticent about flying right now. This is not only a major blow for the New York area, but a major blow for the airline industry, no matter what the cause of this crash.
Well, it's a major blow to all of us, Katie. And what we need to do, obviously, is to move together calmly and responsibly to find out exactly what occurred here and address it. And I'm confident that that will be done. But you're exactly correct, obviously. This is a very nervous time for everyone. But it is also a time such as this that we all need to collect our wits and move forward with the existing structures that we have in place that have done such an excellent job working in the past to determine and protect us in terms of aviation safety.
And it's probably worth pointing out too, Jim, there may not be any easy or immediate answers when it comes to figuring out the root cause of this crash. Jim Hall, former chairman of the NTSB. As always, Jim, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Katie.
Obviously, so many family members concerned about the outcome of this flight and wanting information about their loved ones who may have been on board American Airlines Flight 587. As you can see, we're going to put a phone number up on the screen. Once again, this is for family members to call for information about loved ones on board this flight, 1-800-245-0999. I'll say it one more time, 1-800-245-0999. Of course, they would prefer that only family members use this phone line so that they don't clog it up with too many calls. Steve Good was another eyewitness to the crash. Steve, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Tell me where you are.
I'm at the Rockaway Sunset Dino, Beach 116th Street.
So you're about, what, 13 blocks away from where the main part?
Yeah, the plane streaked right by the bay here, right outside our windows, right where we saw the Trade Center blow up. And we have a good view of the bay and JFK Airport. And it was a normal takeoff, and then it just like sort of started to disintegrate, and pieces flew off the plane. And I have two pieces on the roof here, one a 5-foot piece. Hello?
Yeah, go ahead. We're listening.
One a 5-foot piece and one a 2-foot piece. So it definitely was breaking up before it crashed. And when I ran up there right when it happened, and there was a house on fire on Beach 127th Street, and it looked like a step about 4 blocks away is where the main crash site was, Beach 130th Street and Newport Avenue. And it looks like a half a dozen houses on fire there. And right now I'm looking out my window, and there's 2 Coast Guard cutters and about a dozen police boats going back and forth, picking up debris in the water right outside. So it definitely was debris out there as well.
So when we talk about Beach 129th Street, where the main part of this plane came down, that literally is a street that goes right along the beach.
No, the beach runs, what does the beach run? It runs opposite the beach. Beach 129th Street runs from beach to bay. But it looks like it happened on Newport Avenue, which runs parallel to the beach, 2 blocks off the beach.
Okay, we've heard a couple of reports, Steve. One that the engine fell off this plane, or at least one of the engines fell off this plane prior to it hitting the ground. Did you see that?
I definitely saw something. It definitely fell on a house on 4 blocks away from the main crash site. I definitely saw 4 fire trucks, and I'm looking at a picture now on one of the TV screens of an engine laying in the middle of the street. So it definitely looks like an engine fell off. That looks like the second engine, because something fell off on top of a house that made it go on fire. And the picture they're showing on the TV isn't on a house. It's separate.
And can you confirm that this plane came in nose first?
I didn't see it go in.
No?
I didn't see it. It streaked. There's trees over there. It streaked into the trees, and then and that was it. But it definitely fell apart. Some of it fell apart before it hit, because, like I said, there's 2 pieces on the roof here. One a 5-foot piece of the inside of the skin of the plane,
right,
and another piece of insulation. It looks like in between the skin and the outside of the plane.
I'm not going to ask you to speculate, Steve, but you say you got to within about 3 blocks of where this plane is now. Is there any way to tell whether there are any large sections of this plane remaining intact? Hello? Steve, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I'm just saying, is there any way for you to tell, based on how close you got to the actual crash site, whether there are any large sections of this plane that remained intact?
No, it was so smoky I couldn't see 20 feet in front of me. I mean, when I got out there, it was right when it happened, and there was so much black smoke, I couldn't breathe and I couldn't see anything.
All right, Steve, good.
So it was a pretty bad scene.
All right, and by the way, we've heard reports that about 4 houses on the ground were on fire. Can you confirm that?
I could definitely confirm that it was at least 4 houses. It looked to me like more than that. Like I said, I saw one separate house about 4 blocks away. It was definitely fully engulfed. So something must have fallen onto that house before the plane crashed. And it looks like the plane crashed between like 129th and 133rd Street. It looks like a 3-block area that, which would be about the size of a plane. And it's just incredible how many cops and firemen are up here. I just can't believe it.
Steve, is it too chaotic to know if there was anybody inside those homes or those buildings?
I would say there was definitely people inside. I mean, I don't know, but I'm seeing ambulances going the opposite direction, which looks like it means they're taking wounded away. I would say that I've seen 15 ambulances just streak by while I'm on the phone with you, go in the opposite direction, which means they must be taking somebody somewhere to a hospital.
You talked about the buildings that were hit, and you believe even more than 4. Were these private homes? Can you tell me a little about the structures? All private homes?
All big private homes, like $500,000 homes, and the Harbor Light restaurant looks like it was, which is on Beach 130th Street and Newport Avenue. I know that the 2 houses next door to that restaurant were on fire when I saw it, and I couldn't see any further because of the smoke.
And these are historic homes, right?
Yes. And actually, here's my brother, if you want to, he just came from the scene.
Sure, put him on the phone.
Absolutely.
We'd love to talk to him.
Hold on. You want to speak to the news or on the phone?
No, I got to go down. Mom said something.
All right.
All right. No, he's too fucked up.
All right,
Okay.
Steve.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. By the way, we're hearing that a triage center or centers have been set up at a high school and an elementary school in the neighborhood. Both of those buildings were closed for Veterans Day. And we also have to remember that because all the airports in this area are closed, there were a lot of incoming flights that are now being diverted to other airports. A Delta Airlines spokesperson, Peggy Estes, said the airline was working to account for all of its planes at the moment.
Okay, let's go down to NBC's Campbell Brown at the White House. Needless to say, the president's schedule this morning has been altered significantly. Campbell?
Katie, the president is in the Oval Office now, and as you mentioned, his schedule today has been adjusted so that he can monitor the crash and any new developments. He had no public schedule today per se. He had planned to do some interviews with Russian and selected American reporters here in advance of his summit this week with Russia's President Putin. Those interviews, we understand, have now been postponed. White House Press Secretary Ari Fleischer has been in meeting with the president this morning. He is also getting updates from his national security team and from the Situation Room here at the White House. From what officials tell us, no determination from the White House officially as to what may have happened. One official saying that it is still too early, obviously, to speculate. But again, obviously, it has put officials here on a state of heightened alert. White House staff was supposed to have the day off today because of the holiday. Many now have been called back in. They're arriving as we speak, and no word yet, Katie, on whether we may hear from the president on this, at least not at this point.
But Campbell, so far, they're not treating this as a terrorist event. They're sort of waiting to see.
Yes, but I would say it has certainly heightened the state of alert here. As we've been reporting, the request was made from New York for additional air support. That was granted, and as you know, fighter jets have been patrolling the East Coast since the September 11th attacks. So, needless to say, when something like this happens, the White House shifts gears, if you will, and they're very much on edge right now, but being very cautious, cautious about what they're saying.
All right, Campbell Brown at the White House. Campbell, thank you very much.
It is 11 o'clock on the East Coast, 8 o'clock out west, and you're looking at a live picture of the Rockaway section of Queens, where unfortunately we have some sad news to share with you this morning. An American Airlines flight, Flight 587, en route from John F. Kennedy International Airport in the New York metropolitan area, has crashed. It was en route to the Dominican Republic, to Santo Domingo, carrying, according to reports, up to 260 passengers. It's crashed about 5 miles south of the airport into a residential area. There are buildings on the ground on fire. The capacity, as you just saw, 275 people. We think that 255 passengers were on board, possibly 9 crew members. We're going to put a phone number up right now for family members of people who may have been on board this plane. It's an American Airlines information number, 1-800-245-0999. The plane took off at about 9:15 or 9:20 Eastern Time this morning and crashed just a couple of minutes after takeoff.
That's right, just 5 miles from JFK. According to the Associated Press, Bush administration officials say the FBI believes there was an explosion aboard the plane, and they're investigating its source. Many unanswered questions. Apparently, one of the engines dropped out prior to the actual crash. As you can see, there are New York firefighters at the scene. Some 44 units have been dispatched there. Mayor Giuliani is on his way if he's not there already. We're going to go to NBC's Bob Hager, our aviation expert, to tell us what he knows so far about this crash. Bob?
The crash occurred 5 miles from Kennedy Airport. It was shortly after takeoff. The numbers of people on board have changed during the reporting through the morning, but American Airlines confirms it was 255 on the plane, total number aboard, 246 passengers and 9 crew members. Now, the information that you just passed on about a Bush administration official saying that the FBI believes there was an explosion on this plane, that's That's new information and very, very important. An explosion does not necessarily indicate a device or an act of terrorism. For instance, everything so far has said that something happened on the left side of this plane, according to all the eyewitnesses. And the left wing, as the right wing, would be full of fuel because the fuel tanks are located in the wing. You could have had a fuel explosion. You could have had some kind of uncontained explosion, although it's more unusual, of the engine. But the last eyewitness that talked to us just a short while ago had indicated besides the engine being in a separate piece, that small pieces of the plane were around his area too. So I thought when I heard it, you think explosion, because something to have scattered pieces of the plane before it hit the ground, again, it's just a very unusual scenario in a crash.
But Bob, there is a mechanical explanation for an explosion, because most lay people, they hear explosion aboard the plane and they automatically think it was some kind of device.
Yeah, well, I was thinking fuel explosion. That's what we had with the TWA 800 crash. That one was an explosion of the center fuel tank under the belly of the plane, and this is something out in that wing area, but the wing is more apt to be loaded for shorter flight. That is, TWA was a transatlantic flight. This was a flight down to the Caribbean. So the fuel would be in the wings, and that's another potential source of an explosion.
Bob, we were just looking at some pretty dramatic videotape of the scene of a house, apparently, fire raging in what is primarily, excuse me, a residential area. Eyewitnesses say that there are many historic, very big homes in that general area. So,
well, since we were talking about fuel, I mean, this happens on takeoff, so the plane is full of fuel. So no matter whether the fuel was involved in the explosion that brought the plane down, the minute it hit, those tanks would rip open and the aviation fuel is scattered all over the place, and there are plenty of sources, things that can ignite it. So that's why you get that big fire.
Okay. All right, Bob, thanks a lot. We'll be back with you in just a few minutes.
Of course, New York City's Mayor Rudolph Giuliani has had far too much experience dealing with tragedies over these past couple of months. He rushed to the scene of this crash this morning, and just a few minutes ago, he spoke to reporters.
All right, can you tell us what's going on here? Well, sure. There's been a crash. Plane, as far as we know, the plane was taking off to Santo Domingo. It crashed over Rockaway. We don't know yet the full extent of the damage. Obviously, the fire and smoke is very, very bad. And we're going to go over to helicopter now and assess the damage and the rescue operation, make sure it's organized in the right way. And everyone should remain calm. We talked to the White House several times. There's air cover. You can see the jets up in the air, making certain that this is an isolated incident, that nothing else will happen. We've preliminarily put the city on high alert, so we've closed certain things down just to make sure that we find out what this is all about. And we'll reassess that in an hour or two. And everybody just remain calm. You know, right now, the fire department and the police department are engaged in trying to rescue any survivors, keep it contained, and the rest of the city should remain as calm as possible. And we're going to go up in a helicopter now, take a look at what's going on, and then we'll have more to report in a little while.
And how about the buildings on the ground? What happened on the ground?
Don't know yet. We don't know yet. I mean, obviously, it did a lot of damage. We don't know the full extent of it. And we can tell you that better in a little while. I spoke to the president. I spoke to the governor. They are all alerted. They're going to give us all the help and all of the assistance that we need. And I think right now our effort has to be focused on trying to save any survivors if there are any. We're going to try very hard to do that, okay?
Now,
so why don't you...
The engine was in the Texaco station. Is that an engine?
Yeah, we are told, but we have several conflicting reports of what happened. But at least one group of people that saw it say that the engine came off first, then the plane crashed. And then as to whether the plane exploded before it crashed or after, there are conflicting reports. That's usual in a situation like this. So you've got to give us a little time so we can pull this all together, all right? Thank you.
New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani trying to get to the bottom of the situation as it chaotically unfolds in Queens. Meanwhile, someone else monitoring the situation is President Bush, who is in the Situation Room at the White House. Campbell Brown is at the White House with more on that. Campbell?
And security Tom Ridge is also in the Situation Room. What this is essentially an information center here at the White House where all of the information from military sources, from intelligence is coming in so that they can monitor everything. As you've been reporting this morning, the Associated Press has a report from FBI officials that there may have been an explosion aboard the plane before the crash. No one at the White House confirming that at this point. They're being very cautious with the language here, saying that it is still too early to speculate about what may have been behind this. We are expecting possibly, though, in a short time to hear from the White House press secretary, Ari Fleischer, who has also been meeting with the president this morning. And as we reported earlier, Katie, his schedule today has been adjusted in order to deal with this and monitor development. The chief of staff had given most of the White House staff the day off today. Because of the holiday, they have now been called back in, many of them in anticipation of this. The president was supposed to be doing some interviews in preparation for his summit with Russia's President Putin. Those interviews now on hold while they monitor these developments, Katie.
Obviously, as I was mentioning earlier in this broadcast, Campbell, this is a blow for the airline industry, no matter what the cause, at a time when the president is urging people to take to the skies again and helping with a major government bailout of the beleaguered airline industry. This cannot be seen as very good news.
No, and that's been a major concern. The impact on the economy, the fact that people, despite urges by the president himself, despite attempts to improve security at airports, putting the National Guard in airports, the president just announcing an increase in the number of National Guard at airports just a few days ago, still not seeming to have an impact. People have been staying away, and this, as you say, is certainly not going to help.
Yeah, and again, a horrific tragedy for families who have loved ones on board, even more important than the economic impact at this point in time. Campbell Brown at the White House. We just want to show that number again since it was up there. This is the number family members can call if they believe that someone they know or love is on that flight. Of course, we have no idea if there are survivors or what the casualty situation is, but that number is 1-800-245-0999. Again, that's something that was enacted in the airline industry following, I believe, the crash of the Pan Am flight over Lockerbie, Scotland, because they had a very difficult time, many of the family members, getting information and figuring out if their loved ones were in fact on that plane. And that's why when you do check in these days, you have to give a phone number and a name of next of kin or someone you want called in the event of an emergency.
Katie, for people who are just tuning in, of course, you just switched away from the video, but if we look at that live video again, we should explain what it is you're looking at. You know, a short while ago, there was an awful lot of smoke coming from the furthermost piece of land there. Al Roker used to live in the area, so why don't you describe? We're looking from Kennedy Airport, right, and there.
That's the earlier video of after the crash, not very long after it. And what we were looking at is a small spit of land. It's about not even a mile across, maybe a little bit more, called the Rockaways. And it's a small sandbar, basically. And this plane, a lot of the planes fly right over that spit of land when they're taking off in certain patterns. And what has happened, obviously a plane crashed there. We're talking about a very populated area. Earlier I thought it could have been an area that was a little more middle class, but as we've seen in some of the video, these are very large homes that have caught fire. And it's, again, very close to the water. And we're looking at an area that's very, very densely populated with a lot of people, small shops, restaurants, and private homes.
All right, Al, thanks very much. Pete Williams is our Justice correspondent. Pete, obviously, you know, the first thought at the Justice Department is, you know, can we monitor our channels to see if any terrorist activity was in the offing? What have they been doing on that front? Pete? Apparently we have not connected to Pete Williams at the Justice Department, but from what we understand, Justice officials had been monitoring channels trying to find if any specific threats had been made. Of course, we've been on a high state of alert over the past couple of weeks. Pete,
yes,
can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Early on, the Justice Department immediately began to check its intel channels as well as other intelligence agencies. There had been no warning of a potential crash, no threat indication that hijackings were in the offing. Now, you have said that the Bush administration says the FBI is looking into whether there's an explosion aboard the plane. What we're told by Justice Department officials is the FBI is in fact doing that, but based solely on eyewitness reports, based solely on people on the ground saying they thought they heard or saw an explosion before the plane crashed. That's the reason that the FBI will look into this, as well as the FAA and the other aviation authorities. But this is the fact that the FBI is getting into this, we're told, is not based on any new information or anything indicating proof or an indication of terrorism other than merely the crash itself and the eyewitnesses who said they thought they saw an explosion aboard the plane before it crashed.
Having said that, Pete, I'm sure that officials at Justice will be following radio and telephone transmissions to see if, as was the case on September 11th, there are people calling to discuss this, any kind of congratulatory messages that go over the transom?
Absolutely. That'll be the work of the intelligence agency. Unfortunately, there's a term for those sorts of things when people make those calls called high-fiving. You know, that's what they call it in the intelligence agencies, and they will be looking for any indication of that. But so far, we're told there has been none, and no threats, no warnings, no indication, in other words, other than the crash itself, to think that this was a crime or an act of terrorism.
Yeah, but Pete, didn't it take a while to determine that? I mean, there was really no warning before September 11th, was there? I mean, in hindsight, I guess there might have been a few things that U.S. intelligence people should have picked up, but there was no clear-cut, you know, predictor of this.
Well, you're absolutely right about that. It is still very, very early in this to say anything. However, I think if you go back to September 11th, when the first plane hit the World Trade Center, the thought was that was an accident, but not when the second plane hit it, and not when the plane hit the Pentagon, and not when you began to see the pattern. But at this point, there's just nothing to indicate it, but you're absolutely right, it's still very early.
And they're focusing predominantly on some kind of mechanical failure or airline problem rather than a terrorist act at this juncture. Hey, Pete, thank you very much. We're going to talk to Kenny Good now, who's an eyewitness. Matt spoke with his brother Steve a few minutes ago. I believe he was at a diner. Kenny, where are you and what can you tell us?
I was at the diner when it happened. I was looking out of the window talking to a couple of my friends, and I saw the one engine fell off, and I saw a fire, and then the tail fell off into the bay. And I jumped in my truck and flew down there to see if I could help. There's one house on fire that was a couple blocks away. I helped get some people out and helped stretch some lines in there, and then I ran down and I saw there's like two houses that are completely gone. There's a lot of dead bodies in the street. There's all kind of mass devastation.
But let's focus, Kenny, on the good news that you were able to get some people out of that first house. How many people were in there, and were they okay?
Yeah, they were okay. There was 3 people on the engine landed on their back porch, and it ignited the whole house. And thank God it didn't land 10 feet over, a little bit more, it would have crushed the whole house.
And you say that 2 other houses were completely destroyed?
Completely destroyed. There's nothing there. And then the house, there's like 6 or 7 other houses on fire, and there's a lot of bodies, and
Kenny,
a lot of smoke and flames and diesel fuel, and the sewers are on fire.
The 2 houses that were completely destroyed, were they right near the crash site, or? I mean, can you?
The plane crashed in the air. It blew up in the air, and then when it fell down, one of the engines, it looked like hit that house. It's right on 131st Street, and it's completely gone. The firemen everybody was helping. Everybody was stretching line. All the civilians were helping. It's crazy.
Have you been actually able to see the plane itself?
I saw the engines, and I didn't see any fuselage or anything, no. I think the tail is in the bay or something like that. And I see on the news they have some people on the beach, and there's some pieces of planes. And my car got hit with some pieces when I was on the way down there, and we have some pieces of the plane at the diner. Also on the roof, there's a whole bunch of pieces.
Kenny, you mentioned there are some bodies in the street there. Is there any chance in your mind that there may be some survivors from this crash?
Definitely not. No way. The fire was so hot and intense. It's unbelievable. There's no way anyone survived that.
Obviously a scene of devastation. Kenny Good. Ken, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Yeah. All right. I just want to thank all the firemen and police and everybody. They're the greatest.
I know there are about 200 firefighters on the scene, we understand, and obviously they have their work cut out for them today. Kenny, thanks very much.
We'll talk about the police. The Port Authority police have responded to this crash. Steve Prospero is with the PA Police. Steve, good morning to you.
Good morning.
How many people did you get on the scene?
We probably have about 50 people on the scene from LaGuardia and Kennedy airports, various surrounding areas. Officers who lived in the neighborhood also responded.
Tell me what they're reporting.
Right now they're reporting, just as that eyewitness reported, there was a lot of fire, and the area is being cordoned off to be set up for the investigation.
And is the Are there several different areas of impact, Steve, where fires are burning?
All we know is what we've been hearing also, that there was probably the main area and then a smaller area off a block or so away. But right now, that's still under investigation by the FAA, the FBI, NYPD.
You mentioned some of the officers lived in the area. How quickly were you able to get people on the scene?
We had people there within minutes. They were all reported into here at the Central Police Desk at Police Headquarters and said they were on the scene. We're trying to coordinate it. Chief Morris, Chief of the Department, is on the scene at Kennedy Airport, and various command officials are in the helicopter circling the area and setting up command posts.
Steve, we heard an eyewitness not long ago talk to us about seeing ambulances streaming from the site of the crash somewhere. He didn't know where they were going. We understand there are some triage centers set up in a couple of schools. I mean, that would hopefully be a good sign if perhaps they are rushing some injured to hospitals or triage centers.
Obviously, I mean, New York City, the fire department, EMS, they're experts at what they do, and they certainly know how to set up for this kind of disaster. I mean, we're very proud to work with them.
But you haven't heard any reports of survivors at this particular time?
We have no reports of anybody surviving. We have no reports of anyone missing. We have no reports of any deceased yet. We have no reports at all of anybody on that plane.
All right, Steve Prospero with the Port Authority Police Department. Steve, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Reports indicate there were 255 people aboard that American Airlines Flight 587 en route from JFK to the Dominican Republic to Santo Domingo, and apparently 9 crew members included in that 255 count. NBC's Bob Hager joins us again from Washington. Bob, have you learned anything new?
Katie, I have here a list here of previous crashes of the A30 Airbus. There have been 5 of them over 13 years, none by a U.S. airline until now. There were with the most recent first, there was a China Airlines crash back in 1998, Garuda Indonesia Airlines in 97, another China Airlines crash in 94, Pakistan International Airlines crash in 1992, and an Iran Air crash was the first one of this model of plane back in 1988. That's quite a few crashes to have had 5 crashes of this particular model in 13 years. Going back to that issue of explosion that's come up, Pete Williams told us that the FBI's information, and it was a kind of a roundabout quote, a Bush administration official quoting the FBI as saying that they had a report of an explosion on the aircraft. But then Pete told us that they're hearing that, they're putting that together only from the eyewitness accounts, so not from independent information from American Airlines or from the FAA. But as we said before, an explosion on a plane, if there were an explosion on this plane, and that surely is, there's signs of it with the engine coming down in one place and pieces of the planes coming in another, but it doesn't necessarily, as we said before, indicate a terrorist act, because there are things such as a fuel tank explosion that can cause the explosion in flight. Also, if the engine ripped off, and we've seen pictures of that engine, it's rather dramatically damaged, it would break through a lot of fuel lines, you'd get a lot of fire around that, and that also would give the appearance of an in-flight explosion.
That's right. I was going to say that was the case of that TWA Flight 800 when that center fuel tank exploded. So it doesn't necessarily, it could be a mechanical explosion, not necessarily a man-made one. Bob, I was just curious, you know, we spoke with the head of this, or the manufacturer of this particular airplane. If these are so raved about by pilots, how come there are only 35 in the entire U.S. fleet, all of them owned by American Airlines?
And I can't really give you an answer on that. If the plane has been around for some time, I know the popular models of Airbus at first were the ones that, that was the A320, I believe, that challenged the 737 aircraft, and that was the first wave of Airbus sales in this country. But at this point, the manufacturer has come on so strong that lots and lots of airlines have bought its product, and it's challenging Boeing now, even outselling Boeing lately.
All right, Bob Hager, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Bob, I just want to ask you a question. Obviously, as you said, no way should we jump to conclusion this was anything other than a mechanical problem. But you've been covering increased security measures at airports in the wake of September 11th. What's in place now in terms of matching passengers to checked luggage? And would you imagine, I would guess that the airlines and the Justice people are going over the passenger list very carefully as well.
Oh, yes. No, clearly they would be. And on a foreign flight like this, the rule is that there is supposed to be a match of the piece of luggage, every piece of luggage, to ensure that the passenger who checked that luggage has indeed boarded the flight. And if the computer says that they haven't, they're supposed to hold the flight up and pull the luggage off. That's not the case with domestic flights. There's only one or two airlines that practice bag matching, 100% bag matching with domestic flights. But on a foreign flight like this, there's supposed to be the bag match. The theory there is that someone would not check the luggage and get on the planes themselves, the plane themselves, because they'd be committing suicide, blowing themselves up in flight if the bag contained a bomb. Well, yes, as I was going to say, since September 11th, we know that that theory is out the window.
When will that manifest be available, Bob, do you think?
To us?
Yes.
Oh, I would think that'll take later on today, or maybe first thing in the morning. Usually they want to notify all the passengers and next of kin before they make the manifest public. But immediately the FBI, CIA, people like that would have it and be going over it.
Okay, Bob Hager. Oh, I'm sorry, Al has a
Bob,
question.
I just wanted to ask a question. If, in light of this, will the airlines or the FAA, will they look at grounding these planes and to check them over until they know what's happened?
Usually you don't ground an entire fleet of aircraft until you're more certain of a particular part or thing being wrong with it. First, you'd want to be convinced that it was a mechanical or an equipment problem. Grounding the fleet of planes is a very drastic step, so that should not come this early. Unlike the military, where it's not as costly to them to ground a plane, and they're more likely to ground a fleet immediately at the first sign of a crash, even long before they know the cause. But no, that wouldn't happen in this case. Not right away, anyway.
Thanks, Bob. Thank you.
Let's go to Andrea Mitchell, who's is she in New York or Washington?
She's in New York, actually.
Actually, New York. Andrea?
I'm in New York, Matt, because of United Nations meetings, ironically today, on terrorism. But we should point out that the CIA intelligence officials are telling me this morning there is absolutely no indication of any kind of terror warning associated with this crash. They are assuming at this stage that this is mechanical failure, some kind of airline problem. And to follow up on what Bob and you were just discussing, the FIA is right now passing those passenger lists to the intelligence community at Langley. They're going over those names. Simultaneously, they are also checking with foreign intelligence services to see if anyone has picked up any intercepted conversations that are sort of a congratulatory mode, as Pete Williams was suggesting earlier, the high-fiving that have been heard in the past after terror incidents. So far, no indication, as we say, of any kind of communications, any kind of intercept that would indicate that this was a terrorism act.
All right, Andrea, thank you very much. Andrea Mitchell in New York this morning. Howard Schwach is a newspaper editor, a local newspaper, I understand, in the area. He's on the scene. Howard, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Tell me what you're seeing.
Well, it's devastation here. This is a highly residential area. It's about the whole peninsula is only 4 blocks wide from the ocean to the bay, and from the ocean to the bay for a 4-block stretch between 128th and 132nd, it's just smoke and devastation.
Can you see any major portions or sections of that plane, Howard?
There is a wing standing up in the backyard on 128th Street, and that house is on fire. One of the engines of the plane landed in a gas station on 129th Street, and it started a fire there. They were afraid that the fire would get to the gas tanks, but they got it out pretty well. There are pieces of the plane all over the place. People who saw it, when I got there right after it happened. We're only about 6 blocks away in our office, and I live only 3 blocks away from where it happened. Tell me that the plane was on fire as it came over Rockaway, and there was a small explosion in one of the wings, and the engines, 2 of the engines came off.
Howard,
the plane was pretty much scattering debris as it came over the peninsula.
Howard, we've heard reports of ambulances leaving the scene. I guess that could be people on the ground who are injured.
A fireman and a police officer that were involved in an automobile accident that just came out in the ambulance. I'm not saying that they haven't gotten people out, but I'm standing about 50 feet away from the triage at a local restaurant called Harbor Light, and all the ambulance units are still standing by there. So there are a lot of volunteer ambulance units from Broad Channel and from Breezy Point, and Hamilton Beach, and there's NYFD ambulances, and they haven't been doing much because there's not much for them to do, unfortunately.
All right, Howard Schwach. What newspaper is it, Howard?
This is The Wave. We're 15,000 weekly.
All right, Howard Schwach, who's on the scene in the Rockaways this morning. Howard, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
MSNBC's Ashley Banfield joins us now on the phone. Ashley, what can you tell me?
Matt, I'm about a block away from the actual scene, and I've been seeing hundreds and hundreds of medics, rescue workers, fire crews, police responding from all over the New York area coming into this zone. They have tried to set up a perimeter to try to keep people out. I'm standing here with Michael Herskowitz, who's a paramedic who's just come out from the scene. Michael, you mentioned earlier there were 150 or so ambulances, but many of them are being turned away now. What's the situation? Why are they turning ambulances away?
Everybody's being turned away right now. They're saying they don't need any help right now. The fire department's handling everything on their own. I don't think they have any survivors as of yet. There's just a big, huge hole in the ground. Multiple houses are missing. There's actually one house that's standing right in the middle. It's amazing how that one survived. It's intact. I happen to know the EMT that lives there. Otherwise, they just sent in 2 rescue crews with from EMS, from the fire department to, I guess, I'm not sure exactly why they were sent in. They were sent in only stretchers, no equipment. Maybe it's a rescue effort. I'm not sure what they've found so far.
We heard there were a number of ambulance crews who went in with stretchers. Have any come out?
Not as of yet, but again, I saw when they went in, when they were sent in, then they pushed us all back, so I don't know if they've come out yet. I don't know what they found.
You also said earlier that there were hundreds and hundreds of response teams who had come here. Does it look as though they're going to be able to do anything at this time, or is this just a disaster zone?
Actually, I think little by little everybody's being pushed away and everybody's just leaving the scene. There's really nothing to do for EMS over here. Maybe the few crews that the fire department has, but as far as voluntary services and voluntary hospitals, everybody's pretty much backing up and leaving the scene. There's no EMS work to do.
All right, Michael Herskowitz, thanks very much for your help. We appreciate it. Matt, if I can just give you a bit of a scene setter as to what it's like getting into this area. There are checkpoints all the way along the route getting in here. We went through about 8 of them on the way here. We're turned away several times. There are volunteer firefighters coming in from all over the New York area. We saw also highway patrol, NBC. We've got response teams from everywhere, but many of them are milling about at this time, it seems, on the perimeter. And from what I've gathered from a lot of the people who we've been able to talk with as we've been running into the scene, many of them are being told at this time that there is no need for them. I was also told that there were about 4 houses that were charred and still burning, but that no rescue teams have been able to actually get into those houses at this time to see if there are any survivors. But it's looking more and more at this time, according to the rescue workers, that there aren't going to be a lot of survivors coming out of this, Matt.
All right. MSNBC's Ashley Banfield, about a block from the crash site in the Rockaways. Ashley, thanks.
Sure.
All right, let's go now to Pete Williams, who's at the Justice Department. Peter, what are they saying now?
Katie, the federal officials here say they have, from the beginning of this, of course, been sensitive to the possibility that this could be the result of an act of crime or terrorism, but so far, nothing to indicate that. Now, there were eyewitness reports of mechanical difficulties or something visible or even audible going wrong, like an explosion before the plane crashed. This is strictly from eyewitnesses. This is not from any official government source, nor any law enforcement officials believing this is to be the case. But nonetheless, because of those eyewitness reports, the FBI has joined the investigation. Now, of course, in New York, there's a well-developed joint terrorism task force that responds to things like this. They responded to the crashes on September 11th, so they're well experienced in handling these kinds of things. And that's the reason the FBI is looking into this. But we want to emphasize, even though it's very early, at this point there's no indication of any terrorist act, and law enforcement has not, on its own, independently, developed any information that there was an explosion on board the plane. This is strictly coming from phone calls and eyewitnesses that law enforcement people are talking to. So no indication of terrorism at this very early time, just about 2 hours after this crash.
Just review quickly for us, Pete, what kind of information the Justice Department will be gathering to kind of make some assessment about what might have happened, because obviously it's still very, very early right now, and they're relying, as we are, on eyewitness reports.
Well, that's right. At this stage in these things, and we know this based on the experience with TWA 800 and some of the recent crashes in that area, these investigations follow a parallel course. Both the FBI and the NTSB will be looking for the same information. Radar tracks, any radio contact, of which we've heard there have been very little or none in terms of radio contact, but they'll look at the radar tracks They will look, as you were just talking with Andrea, at the passenger list to see if there are any people on there who match any names in the FBI database. That's still a very early process. That's still ongoing. We haven't heard any of the results of that, and probably won't for at least a couple of days. I mean, obviously law enforcement will have that, but it's doubtful that we'll hear anything about that, because it does take time. And in fact, what they do is, if there are any matches in the databases, they pursue that. But what they will try to do, we know this from the September 11th experience, they will actually contact family members of everyone who was on that plane. And they will ask very difficult questions at a hard time for a family that has just lost a loved one on board that plane. But they will ask what they have to ask, which is, you know, where was your family member going? Why were they going there? What were they doing in the few days up to the crash, and all that kind of thing. That's down the road, but right for now, you're right, they will check the manifest. But there were no threat warnings about imminent hijackings. There were no, been no credible threat that someone was going to do this. None of this seems to fit in any way with a picture of terrorism or a crime, again, at this very early stage.
All right, Pete Williams in the Washington Bureau. Pete, thank you very, very much. Just to repeat what we know right now, American Airlines Flight 587 crashed in the Rockaway section of Queens, New York, shortly after takeoff, about 5 miles from JF Kennedy Airport. It was en route to the Dominican Republic with 255 people on board, at least 9 of those crew members. Apparently the engine, according to eyewitnesses, one of the engines dropped off, and there was a fire after that, and then shortly thereafter the plane crashed. Several homes are still burning. 2 homes were described as completely obliterated. David Velez is a New York City police officer. He's with the hazmat unit, and he is at the scene right now. David, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Thanks so much for talking with us. I know it must be pandemonium down there. Can you explain, describe what it's like?
They're trying to get everything in order right now. We're trying to let the fire department put the fires out. They were raging pretty well, but we really have to sit back and wait till the fires go out, and then we can attend to our duties.
There's a lot of jet fuel, I understand, that's burning throughout the area. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's kind of concentrated within a 2-block radius.
We've gotten a lot of varied reports on how many homes were affected by this. Do you have any idea, David, at this point?
As far as I can see, there's about 4 that are really badly damaged, that are totally destroyed. And there's a couple of surrounding homes on the outside that were burning.
Have you been able to see the fuselage at all, or to see any pieces of the airplane?
Yeah, there's pieces of the airplane strewn all over the place. There's a couple of blocks away, there's a big piece of the fuselage that actually landed at a gas station.
What can you describe what that is? Because I've heard it was an engine. Is it, obviously it looks like something more than an engine. If this is the scene, it looks like a big piece of the airplane.
Yeah, it's mostly part of the engine, piece of the plane. There's engine laying on someone's front lawn. It's pieces of planes everywhere, on top of the houses, in the backyards. It's a real mess. So hopefully it's just a tragic accident and not another act of terrorism.
What is your primary job there, David, since you are with the hazmat unit?
We're right now just, on support. Whatever the department needs us to do, we'll do. Whether it's, securing a corner or going in and doing the grim, picking up bodies.
It's obviously a holiday for many people, since it is Veterans Day, which I don't know is good news or bad news for the residents of that area. Any indication if there were a lot of people in their homes, or is it just simply too early to tell?
I think it's still too early to know. There was one home that was damaged pretty bad. That actually was an inspector's home, and he luckily, and his wife and his family were able to get out.
And was that initial home where the engine fell, outside the home?
Right in front of where the plane crashed.
Okay, well, David Velez of the New York City Police Department. David, thanks so much for talking with us. Good luck.
Thank you. God bless you.
Let's go over to Robert Levine right now, who's joining us from Peninsula Hospital, not far from the crash site. Mr. Levine, good morning to you.
Good morning, everyone.
What are you seeing? What type of injuries? Who are you treating?
Okay, right now we have approximately 15 individuals who've been brought in from the community. We believe most of them are people who are in the neighborhood at the time, living in the neighborhood or just traveling through the neighborhood. Also some personnel from the emergency services area.
How severe are the injuries?
Not too severe. They're being treated for smoke inhalation primarily, and secondarily for some abrasions. So far it's about 15 as of 15 minutes ago.
So just to confirm, no one on board the plane, no passengers are being treated for injuries, no injuries other than smoke inhalation from people in the neighborhood?
Exactly from what I've been told, Matt.
And how far exactly is your hospital from the
We
crash
are
site?
the closest community hospital to the site. We're approximately 4 miles east, right in the heart of the Rockaway Peninsula.
Are you in touch with the ambulance crews on the scene?
We're having wonderful support from all of the New York City authorities and all the other personnel who've responded to help us out.
And have they talked to you at all about transporting further patients?
Well, we're ready. We can get more people into the hospital right now with similar type of situations, and we have a tremendous amount of support from our staff who came in today. This is a legal holiday, a day off for most non-essential people, but since we're a community hospital, the majority of our employees and medical staff all live within 10 minutes of the hospital, and everybody responded immediately.
All right, Robert Levine at Peninsula Hospital, close to the crash site in Queens. Mr. Levine, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's now go back to NBC's Bob Hager. Bob?
Some little pieces of information. The information that there had been no call of trouble from the plane is now confirmed by an air traffic control source. So we have that from 2 different places at this point, that there was no call of trouble by this plane. So that would indicate that whatever occurred very, very suddenly. The new chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board, her name is Marion Blakey. She will be in charge of the investigation, so she goes to New York from Washington to supervise the investigators' work. The engines on this plane, and I should explain that engines are interchangeable, so you don't always have the same company's engine on the same aircraft, but these were GE engines, GE CF6 engines. It's a very popular and widely used model of engine. Otherwise, the things that the investigators will be looking for very early on, the recorders, they could be crucial if other information doesn't come to light sooner to determine what was happening here. You have two different kinds of recorders. The voice recorder picks up anything that was said by the pilot and co-pilot in the cockpit, and then the flight data recorder, which on a newer aircraft like this one monitors just a lot of different functions aboard the plane in terms of its direction and altitude and heading, and a number of systems on the plane as well. So those will be invaluable in this crash.
Bob, I'm just curious. I know that Andrea Mitchell is reporting that she was told by a senior law enforcement official that these flights and others that are going to the Dominican Republic on American are checked very carefully because, according to this individual, they're frequently used by drug runners, and this flight is notorious among members of the law enforcement community. Do you know anything about that?
No, only what Andrea said, but what you think of there is there's a difference between the carry-on luggage, which is checked ever more thoroughly now at the security points as you board the aircraft. And then there's the whole other question of the checked luggage that goes into the hold. And what we would have had on this flight, we believe, is at least a match to make sure that every person that was on the plane, every bag that was checked, the person who checked it did actually board the plane. But as to determining what's inside the luggage that goes in the hold, that's iffy because they have these big screening devices, but there's been a lot of complaints that they aren't used enough to check for explosives going aboard the aircraft.
All right, Bob Hager in Washington. Bob, thank you very much. Now we're going to go next to David Stempler, who is with the Air Transport Association. Mr. Stempler, what can you tell us?
Katie, it's the Air Travelers Association. We represent airlines.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. Well, what can you tell us?
Don't know very much at this point. I mean, lots of possibilities. Potential there for what's called an uncontained engine failure, where if the engine failed and exploded beyond its case, might have torn itself off from the wing, may have caused that. We had a similar incident, I guess, in 1979 with another American Airlines plane at DC-10 where the engine came off that airplane, and the plane did crash.
Now that was that engine came off that airplane. Why? Because it wasn't bolted on adequately, or what? What was the reason for that
Yes,
previous
there was
crash?
a failure, a structural failure in the back of the support mechanism, and it had to do with the way that the engines were being changed. And when the engine was changed, a part of the support structure got cracked in the process, and so there was a structural failure. And that's another thing they will look for here in this particular incident.
Well, I would think in that wake of that crash, Mr. Stempler, they would have changed the configuration of the plane to preclude this from happening again.
Right, that was that was a DC-10. This was an Airbus 300, quite a different configuration and method of which it was holding on. But again, these are things that they will look at to see why the engine might have come off that aircraft. And one other concern, obviously we don't have any indication of this, but you know, if there was some terrorism, then if there was, let's say, a missile shot up in the aircraft, it would be going for the heat portion of the aircraft, which would have been the engine. Now, there's no indication of that, but that would be a concern that would be looked into pretty carefully.
Mr. Stempler, any other plausible explanation for this kind of catastrophic engine failure when an engine would actually fall from the sky on fire, as the eyewitnesses have contended, and therefore resulting in a loss of control of the plane?
Well, Katie, one of the concerns we always have around Kennedy Airport is there's a large bird population through there. They work pretty hard in the Kennedy Airport area to try to rid the area of planes, but it's an area by which birds do fly through that area, so that is a possibility. These engines are all checked, you know, for bird ingestion, but if they hit perhaps a large flock of birds, there is a possibility that that's something that also needs to be looked into.
Has that caused crashes in the past?
Yes, in the long distance past, we haven't had anything recently, but we did have I think a military plane that crashed up, I think in Alaska or up in Seattle, Washington, a large ingestion of birds. I think it might have been an AWACS plane. So, yeah, this does occur occasionally, and it is a concern around the Kennedy Airport area.
All right, any other possibility? Then you're talking about a flock of birds, you're talking about some kind of mechanical problem where the engine, I guess, doesn't stay on the aircraft for some reason. Anything else? You mentioned the possibility of some kind of terrorist act, some kind of missile going for the engine, which I think officials are not taking too seriously right now. But
right, the pictures I see here, the engine looks like it's pretty much intact, so I don't think that's as serious.
And anything else?
Again, structural failure we talked about somewhere where the engine support came away and the engine fell off and the airplane went out of control at that point. And it would tear away fuel lines, and so you might have a fire. So lots to look at. Hopefully this is more along the lines of a structural problem and not one involving terrorism.
All right, David Stempler. Mr. Stempler, thanks so much.
Katie, good to be with you.
Let's go to NBC's Campbell Brown, who's standing by at the White House this morning. Campbell?
Well, Matt, we are expecting to hear from White House Press Secretary Ari Fleischer in about 15 minutes. He's going to give a briefing in the briefing room here at the White House at noon Eastern time today. The president is here. He has been briefed by intelligence officials. Fleischer was in with the president a short time ago. The Director of Homeland Security, Tom Ridge, also here at the White House. He's down in the Situation Room, which is kind of information center for the White House, where all of their reports from intelligence, military, from the FAA are coming in. Vice President Cheney, we are told, is at an undisclosed location. He is not here at the White House this morning, although officials have been careful to not connect this in any way to what has happened this morning.
So what you're saying is he wasn't moved to that location after this crash?
Exactly. He has, as you know, Matt, been oftentimes kept at an undisclosed location for security reasons since September 11th. And at times coming out to make public appearances. But again, they're approaching this with a great deal of caution at this stage, given that the White House is not speculating in any way what may have caused the crash. They are not ready to point to any sort of terrorism or mechanical failure at this stage. We may get more from Ari Fleischer on this. So again, in terms of the perception given, that they're not saying, at least, that they're in a heightened state of alert. But let me say, the president's schedule has been adjusted in order that he can monitor developments now. This was supposed to be a holiday for much of the White House staff. They were given the day off. They've now been called back in. The president was going to have a day with no public event so that he could prepare for a summit with Russia's President Putin later this week. He had a few interviews scheduled with Russian and American press. Those have now been postponed so that, again, he can stay on top of this situation until they have a little better sense of what's going on, Matt.
All right, Campbell Brown at the White House this morning. Campbell, thank you very much. Let's go over to NBC's Dr. Bob Arnott, who's also, as we've been mentioning all morning long, a pilot someone who has an awful lot of experience in these matters. Bob, what can we rule out at this moment?
You really can't rule out much, Matt. That is, with an engine falling off like this, it could be as simple as birds. We know they have had big problems at JFK. And there's a thing called cornballing in an engine, which means that you have one of the many different fan blades which breaks loose, strips all the way through the engine. There can be some fire visible from the ground, and of course this engine could fall off. Also, if you were to have an explosion, say in a forward baggage compartment, one of those doors could come out. Once it hit those engine blades going at 38,000 revolutions per minute, it's enough to cause a shudder in that engine and for the engine to fall from the plane. Now, this plane, of course, is a fly-by-wire, so it doesn't have the usual hydraulic system you'd expect, say, in a Boeing aircraft. Once that engine falls from the airplane, though, there's a torque in the plane. That is, the plane's going to drift to one side quite quickly. And it is possible, it shouldn't happen, but it is possible if there were other aerodynamic changes in the plane from the departure of the engine or from an explosion, that it could either stall or roll. Now, this airspeed, it's unlikely it would stall right away because you have to slow down to a much slower speed. But for it to roll, many recent crashes, actually, Matt, have been to what we call unusual attitudes. We saw that with the Concorde crash, that when a plane, or also with the Alaska Air, when a plane rolls, it can roll over and be very difficult to recover. Now, you can try and recover, but if you just have 1,000 or 2,000 feet of altitude, it makes it particularly difficult. So I think it's very hard to rule anything out at this point. The lack of communications, of course, because a pilot is going to be struggling as fast and as hard as he can to try and right the airplane, using the rudders to try and make certain that it's straightened away. But we do, of course, have that American crash out of O'Hare, the loss of the engine there, where the plane, there was a possibility when they reconstructed this in the simulator that they'd flown it differently, they may have been able to recover.
Bob, let me interrupt and give you some issues on the security front. See if any of these tidbits give you any information that you might make something of. The plane came in from Miami last night, should have been searched overnight. Since it was an international flight, there was positive bag match. In other words, each bag checked was matched with a passenger. Lost radar contact about 6 minutes after takeoff from JFK this morning. The plane had a fortified cockpit door, no cargo or mail being carried on this flight, and as we've mentioned, the air traffic control communication was normal, no distress call.
Well, what we know is that this plane usually has a tremendous amount of baggage. As people make that flight, they may have appliances or television sets, really too much for airport employees to be able to check by hand or to scan. So could something have been put on the airplane? Certainly could have. That wouldn't have been checked. In terms of it disappearing from the radar trace, we found with many flights later on, whether it be Egypt Air, where they said it disappeared from the screen, but in fact they were able to watch the trace. Beyond what Bob Hager said about the black boxes, which should tell us a lot about how it fell and what kind of attitude and airspeed, you learn something from the radar trace, whether you saw the transponder disappear immediately. If that happens, then it means that it's the disruption of all electrical systems on the airplane on a sort of catastrophic and immediate basis. If it hasn't, you still have the electrics on the airplane working. You may be able to trace the direction that it fell. And I would imagine within hours we'll have that radar trace and have a pretty good sense of what happened. Now, if the electrics go and you don't have a transponder trace, there is a facility in Rome, New York that the Air Force has that actually tracks the hull, that is metal pieces of an aircraft, and I suspect they're looking at that as we speak.
All right, NBC's Dr. Bob Arnott, our chief medical correspondent, who's also a trained pilot, which explains his expertise in this area. Bob, thank you.
You're welcome, Matt.
Katie?
Matt, let's go back down to Washington, where our Justice Department correspondent, Pete Williams, is standing by. Pete, any developments from Justice?
Well, Katie, some interesting things about the FBI's view of this. A senior government official tells us that the FBI has reached no conclusion about the cause of this crash and certainly has not determined that there was an explosion on board the plane. Now, we had reported before that the FBI's initial reason for looking into this was because of the obvious, that the plane appeared to come apart before it crashed, and also because there are several eyewitnesses who say that an engine fell off the plane, but as is often the case in something like this, the eyewitnesses don't agree. This official says some of the witnesses think the engine came off the left side of the aircraft, some think it came off the right side, which I suppose could be explained by which side of the plane they were on and whether they saw the plane coming or, coming toward them or going away from them. Those could all be easily explained, but in any case, as is often the circumstance here, they don't agree on what happened. But in terms of the engine separation, there's nothing to support the idea, according to this official, that there was, in fact, an explosion on the body of the plane. So it's what has gotten them interested in this possibility of an explosion is, once again, strictly eyewitnesses, the obvious fact that the engine came off the plane, but nothing to support the idea that there was an explosion on the main body of the plane. Now recall TWA 800, which also crashed shortly after takeoff. It crashed, in fact, in the ocean instead of on land. But in that case, there were almost immediately, to law enforcement, to news organizations, within minutes of that crash, people calling up saying, I saw a bright light, I heard a loud noise. Now, of course, this is happening in daytime and not at night, but nonetheless, this official says that none of these eyewitnesses are reporting hearing explosions or seeing any kind of bright flash. So this is strictly based on the obvious fact that the engine came off the plane, although the witnesses don't agree on which side it came from.
Well, we should be quick, though, then to make sure that we're not saying officials are jumping to conclusions about terrorism, but they have not. Is it safe to say, Pete, that they're not ruling it out entirely either?
That is precisely the case. It's way too early to say. They simply don't know what caused this crash. They're investigating all possibilities, they say. Nothing to indicate that it was a terrorist act or a criminal act, but they are, as you say, they are open-minded, they're agnostic about this, they're willing to entertain all possibilities and trying to figure out what happened.
I'm just curious, you know, about if you have any thing to say about this Andrea Mitchell report that a senior law enforcement official told her that these flights from, I guess, from JFK to the Dominican Republic are checked very carefully because it's a notorious flight among law enforcement community, the law enforcement community, in terms of being used by drug runners. Have you heard that discussed at all at Justice, Pete?
Well, in the past I have, not in this specific instance, but in covering other stories about drug running, what we're told is that they obviously check the passenger lists. For all of the criticism of profiling, nonetheless, there still is profiling on these sorts of flights. There is it's not a racial issue, but there is a profile of a drug runner, certain kinds of behaviors that drug runners tend to engage in. They do conduct that sort of profiling, which is based on looking at a person's flight history, their behavior as they get on the plane and so forth. And they also use drug-sniffing dogs to sniff luggage randomly and to sniff carry-on baggage. And there are some dogs that are trained to sniff both drugs and explosives. My guess is that the normal dogs that do the drug-sniffing routines on these planes are not cross-trained. They're probably just drug-sniffing dogs and don't detect explosives. But yes, that would certainly be the routine on these sorts of flights that are known by history to be used by drug runners. The question is whether that would expose any other potential criminal wrongdoing, and I'm not sure that it would, other than finding obvious drug runners. But once again, no indication that this is terrorism or a crime very early on.
All right, the drug running aspect, just another piece of the puzzle at this point in time. Okay, Pete Williams. Pete, thanks so much.
Okay.
All right, of course, our correspondents calling their sources, trying to get any information they can to help us piece together the puzzle. NBC's Bob Hager is in Washington this morning. Anything else, Bob?
Well, Matt, in terms of not ruling things out and still going the extra mile on terrorism and not ruling it out, you could come very close to ruling out a hijacking kind of scenario like September 11th at this point. When you figure this plane had only gone off just 6 minutes earlier, so everybody still would have been in their seats and been belted, and this plane had the reinforcements on the cockpit, so no one would have been able to burst into the cockpit suddenly. That is, it had those steel bars to bar entry to the cockpit. And then the sudden loss of communication with no time to push. There's a little button you push if you're being hijacked or you get off a call of some kind. So you could come close to ruling out that kind of terrorist attack. You can't yet rule out the explosive device. And we've been talking, too, about the FBI. The FBI joins all crash investigations at the very beginning, and you keep the FBI in it until you satisfy yourself that it was not some deliberate act that brought the plane down. At that point, the FBI exits.
Hey, Bob, what would happen, what would be happening at JFK right now as far as the victims' families? What would they be setting up right now?
Well, usually they try to make a special room at first, and then later on they get a hotel near the airport where they take those people. And once the NTSB gets on scene, they organize it all very carefully. At the moment, it would be American Airlines tending to it at first, but they would set aside some room there at the airport and bring people into the room and attempt to minister to them right away. And then, as I say, later on, it becomes a more organized thing. NTSB is in charge of it for the government, and they set up a full-time operation with full-time government people to be with those people.
All right, Bob. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Just want to read a couple of things that we've been hearing from eyewitnesses. These are people in the wire reports. One retired firefighter said that he was walking near his home when he heard a plane explode in the sky. It wasn't that loud. He said he heard a woof sound and then saw what he thought was a wing falling off the airplane. All of a sudden, I see an engine fall off, and it went to the side. In 10 or 15 seconds, it went down. That from another eyewitness, Kevin O'Rourke. An engine fell off, and another witness, John Maroney, said the engine plummeted onto a Texaco station near his house, and pieces of the plane were located just a couple of blocks away. And as we've mentioned, we've heard several buildings were pretty much totally destroyed. These were homes in the area by the impact of that plane.
That's right. Neighbors were jolted from their beds, needless to say, as this happened around 9:17 this morning, or I think the plane, I guess, took off around then, and radio contact was lost shortly thereafter. Actually, it took off around 9:13, and radio and radar contact was lost at 9:17, so just 4 minutes later. On the phone is Patrick Sullivan, retired New York City police officer. Mr. Sullivan, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Can you please describe the scene for us there?
Well, I was coming over the Marine Parkway Bridge on my way back to Breezy Point. I noticed on the left side a tremendous plume of smoke, black smoke. We continued over the bridge, and instead of exiting off at Breezy Point, we went towards the Beach Channel Drive to get a look at the smoke. I was with a friend of mine, John Gallagher, and I said to him, I said, it looks like it's at Kennedy Airport. And he goes, no, it looks a little further west. And I said, well, continue on. So as we came out the bottom of the bridge, we saw this, we could see the smoke was right, and we knew it was in the Rockaway. So I told him to go over to Newport Street and go along Newport, and we'll get down as close to the smoke as we could. At about 132nd Street, I got out of the car and I ran down to the corner. And as I looked down to the corner, I could see 6 of the buildings fully engulfed in fire. There had been a fire engine there, an engine company there, and they were putting water on the fire and to try to lay hose. I ran down to the end, and we were fortunate in one respect that the wind was coming off the water, and it was pushing the fire, the heat, and the smoke away from us, so we could get a clear and unobstructed view of what was going on. But at this time, we didn't know what happened. I'd been on the phone with my wife, and she was giving me the reports that she thought initially that a plane landed and had dropped an engine. And about this time, I looked over to the last side of the first building that was engulfed in flames, and I saw what looked like the cowling of an engine. Now, the engine might have been under that cowling, but from my vantage point, I really couldn't see it. But there were parts of the plane, or looked like parts of an engine, strewed all over the street where we were trying to lay the fire hose, where they were trying to lay the fire hose. I went started on the buildings and going from my left to my right, away from the fire, trying to make sure people were outside the building, that nobody was in the buildings. And after that, we started. We heard some minor explosions, some poppings and everything. And then we started putting the hose down on it, and then we put water on it. And then my wife had told me what had happened, that a plane had crash landed, and that but first she said it was landing, and then when I found out later on it was taken off, then I realized that this is probably the beginning of the fire. And I asked one of the firemen who was coming from the other side of the street how far the fire went down, and he said it went as far as he could see, and there was a lot of bodies. But at that time, I didn't see it. And about that time, there were more firemen responding. There were construction workers there helping out, and then they brought an aerial truck in, and they started to get a grip on the fire.
I just want to interrupt you for a moment for people just joining us. I'm talking to Patrick Sullivan, a retired New York City police officer who is an eyewitness at the scene. Mr. Sullivan, I know this must be particularly horrifying for you because I understand that you lost your son in the World Trade Center disaster. Is that right?
Yes, I lost my son Patrick. He worked for Cantor Fitzgerald. We haven't found him yet.
And this must be particularly devastating for you to witness this, another harrowing incident. Obviously, it's unclear what the cause of this crash was, but just to see the devastation must be quite difficult for you.
It was. But again, it kept working, trying to help out. It's when I started to become a spectator that I moved away from the scene, and then sort of I had a reaction. But up until that time, I was just, helping as best I could.
Well,
Firemen were doing a tremendous job.
Well, it looks like it's a very difficult situation. We're looking at some pictures of the scene right now, and some of these fires seem like they're raging pretty hard right now. Where are you in terms of your location to the crash right now?
Now I'm in Breezy Point. I came back home to Breezy Point.
So you're a good bit away from the scene.
I can, yeah. And, we're at a location where I could see the Twin Towers. As a matter of fact, I witnessed the tower coming down from the veranda of my house.
Oh, my goodness. Well,
and I realize now I'm watching television here, and I see the aftermath. Ours was obviously just the beginning. I mean, there's this fire that they're showing that was earlier. It's tremendous. And the thing is that these houses, they don't have any water on them either. So they're going to lose this whole row of houses. And this is an area that had so many people lost at the trade centers, both firemen, civilians, cops. It's just something that we don't really need now.
Oh, it's a terrible blow, terrible blow to so many families, including yours. Patrick Sullivan, retired New York City police officer. Thank you so much for talking with us, and all the best to you and your family, Mr. Sullivan.
Thank you very much. Good night. Have a good day.
We should just probably bring people up to speed in terms of what we know. It is about 4 minutes past noon Eastern time. At about 9:17 this morning, 9:17 a.m., an American Airlines Flight 587, an A300, described as an Airbus carrying 255 people in all, 246 passengers, 9 crew members, crashed shortly after takeoff about 5 miles away from John F. Kennedy Airport, which was where it was taking off from. It was en route to Santo Domingo, which of course is the capital of the Dominican Republic. Eyewitnesses report seeing an engine dropping off the plane, a fiery engine, which caused one fire in the Rockaway section of Queens, and shortly thereafter, I guess there were many pieces of plane that broke up, and it ultimately crashed somewhere near where that debris had initially fallen.
And we should mention immediately after this plane crashed, all 3 major metropolitan airports here in the New York area were closed: New York, LaGuardia, and Newark, or Kennedy, LaGuardia, and Newark. Bridges and tunnels in and around the New York City area were also closed, and this was, again, just as a precaution, because initially law enforcement officials had to treat this as if it was a possible terrorist attack, and we should note that all those airports remain closed at this hour. Let's go now to NBC's David Gregory, who's at the White House this morning. David?
Matt, a little less than 2 minutes away from hearing from Ari Fleischer, the White House press secretary. The president has been briefed all morning long by senior advisors. He also has spoken by phone to Mayor Giuliani and to Governor Pataki. Senior administration officials say reports about an explosion on board do not appear to be the case. One official telling us that everything they have learned so far points to only mechanical failure. Nevertheless, there are heightened suspicions, and the White House, as well as the rest of the country, remains on a heightened state of alert. Secret Service officials telling us there will be no visible changes in the security status both in Washington and around the country because of this, as this investigation goes forward. Matt?
We should mention also that Vice President Dick Cheney, David, is said to be in an undisclosed location, but we were speaking to Campbell Brown earlier, and that is not as a result of this crash. Is that correct?
That's correct. He has been taken to that location at various points since September 11th, not necessarily precipitated by any particular alert, and we're told it's not in reaction to the crash this morning, Matt.
All right, and I understand Ari Fleischer is just seconds away from addressing reporters there at the White House. David, where's the president again right now?
The president has been at the White House all morning. This was supposed to be a very light day, at least publicly. He had a closed meeting with Nelson Mandela. He was preparing for meetings in the next few days with Russian President Putin. President Putin expected still to arrive in Washington on schedule tonight.
All right, David, thank you. As we prepare or wait for Ari Fleischer, the White House spokesperson, to address the reporters, let's put that number up one more time. This is for information. It's a number for American Airlines for passenger information. If you're a family member or a loved one of someone who you think was on American Airlines Flight 587, the number is 1-800-245-0999. 1-800-245-0999. Again, if you're just joining us, that flight was headed from JFK to the Dominican Republic, Santo Domingo. And let's see, should we go back to the White House now? Still waiting the arrival of Ari Fleischer to brief reporters. Here's Mr. Fleischer right now.
Good afternoon. This morning, as the President was convening a meeting of his National Security Council to go over the latest developments in the war against terrorism, he received a note handed into the meeting at 9:25 informing him of the crash of an American Airlines flight at JFK Airport in New York City. That flight, of course, turned out to be Flight 587 from New York's JFK to Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic. At that point, Governor Ridge came down into the Situation Room and immediately began a conference call with the Attorney General, with the Director of the FBI, with the Secretary of Transportation, with the Director of the Federal Emergency Management Administration, with officials from the Department of Defense as well as the Federal Aviation Administration, to monitor events, to receive the latest information, to begin putting in plan the actions the federal government would shortly take. The President called Mayor Giuliani and spoke with Governor Pataki, and the President expressed to both of them his deepest sympathy for the people of New York to be enduring any other such trauma at a time when New York has already gone through so much. The President said to both that the federal government will do everything it can to help, and he informed them both that the government was sending up teams as they were speaking. The President also praised the precautions taken by the Mayor and the Governor concerning the actions they took on the ground. Specifically, the federal government has done the following. The National Transportation Safety Board has a team of investigators on site already, and they have an additional GO team of a larger number of investigators that are en route. The National Transportation Safety Board is the lead investigating agency. The Assistant Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation out of New York City is already on site, and the Director of the Federal Emergency Management Administration, Joe Alba, is en route to New York, will be arriving there later this afternoon. The New York Disaster Team Office remains open in New York, and Director Alba has stated that 4 urban search and rescue teams are on standby and are available in the event that officials in New York seek their assistance. They will respond if requested. That is the status of the information we have at this time. Mr. Roberts?
The fact that the NTSB is the lead on this, is this an indication that you believe it was an accident as opposed to a criminal act?
John, I want to be very cautious about any conclusions at this early time about what is the cause of this. As you know, first facts are often facts that are subject to greatest change, but the National Transportation Safety Board is the lead government agency doing the investigating.
Is there any evidence of terrorism at this point, and was there any reports of trouble from the cockpit or smoke from the cockpit?
There were no unusual communications with the cockpit. We have not yet discovered the black box. Authorities believe they will find it in this case. It has not been found at this moment. There will be additional communications that will be searched to see if there are any other communications, but at this moment, all communications were normal prior to the crash.
Is there any evidence of terrorism at this point?
On the question of whether there's any terrorism, as I indicated at the beginning, first information is always subject to change. We have not ruled anything in, not ruled anything out, but as I mentioned, the investigation is being headed by the National Transportation Safety Board to try to determine the cause of it.
You can't say what other officials have said on background that there is no evidence of terrorism?
I'm aware of what the other official has said, and I understand why they're saying it. Just simply from the White House point of view, where we always maximize caution at a time like this, the White House will continue to gather the facts, to review the information. The President is aware the statements have been made by other officials. There's understandable reason why they said what they've said, and I leave it at that at this moment. Obviously, the White House, as events unfold, as information becomes available, will make all information available.
You're not disputing that information?
Not disputing anything.
David? An explosion on board, and is that being investigated as something that may be purely related to a mechanical failure at this point?
I saw a report on the news earlier that indicated a government official had said there was an explosion on board. I've been informed that there was no government official who gave any such indication. The government continues to gather the facts to ascertain information. There have been, according to eyewitnesses, information that an engine was seen being detached from the plane and that it landed separately from the main body of the airplane.
Secondly, let me just follow on a different point. Has the government received any credible threats that coincided with this morning?
No.
Nothing that would lead it to pointing toward terrorism?
No.
Only the New York airports were shut down. Is that a positive sign? You didn't shut down the nation's entire air system.
I don't want to characterize anything as positive or negative in this light, but clearly the facts speak for themselves. And the foreign airports in the New York area, including Westchester County, were ordered closed by the FAA, the airspace. The FAA is reopening the airspace, and I think that you can expect that the shutdown of the airports will be of a limited duration.
Mike? Wrote the note that was passed to the President, and how does the White House learn that information?
There's a routine functioning here at the White House 24-hour situation room that is manned by some very good experts who have developed a long history of monitoring events around the world of all types, whether they turn out to be accidental or whether they turn out to be something otherwise. And the President was in the one area of the Situation Room in the middle of his National Security Council meeting with the Pentagon and other officials. And a captain who was in charge of the Situation Room brought a note in, and that's how the President heard about it.
What can you tell us about the President's reactions, words or other reactions in the hours since then?
I was with the President when he spoke with Mayor Giuliani and Governor Pataki, and the President was concerned. He's very concerned that New York has to endure any other accident or anything else that this may or may not be. Has heartfelt concern for the people of New York and for the victims of this flight. There are some approximately 250, 255 people aboard the flight. The appropriate FAA or NTSB agencies will be having more specific information on that later. But the President has deep concern and sympathy for the families here, for the community in which the plane crashed, and of course for the people of New York generally.
Are considerations given to a nationwide shutdown, and is that no longer on the boards now?
There is no such consideration at this time.
Is there any? Was there?
I think it's fair to say that any time something like this happens, the government asks a series of questions about how best to handle this. And again, the facts speak for themselves. The FAA ordered the action it took at the 4 airports. It's fair to say they considered other action. The action speaks for itself. Steve?
Does the President still plan to meet? President Putin still plan to go to Crawford? Has his schedule changed at all because of this?
Absolutely, he still plans on that. In fact, the President, he got into the Oval at about 6:58 this morning and spoke with President Jiang Zemin of China and congratulated China on its accession into the World Trade Organization, the WTO. He talked with him about the cooperation in the war against terrorism. The President also had a meeting of the Domestic Consequences Committee in the Oval Office, where he discussed the importance of Congress passing the economic stimulus package as well as the aviation security bill. He talked about the farm relief bill that is being considered in the Senate. And so the President has been monitoring events, talking to officials on the ground, directing the government agencies, as well as conducting other business of the government. He spoke with Prime Minister Blair as well.
Are any new precautions because of the environment we live in? You have the domestic team, obviously, Governor Ridge into the situation right away, but are there any new steps that are taken in these situations because of the environment we live in, say the passenger manifest immediately given to the FBI or anything like that?
I think it's safe to say that as a result of government protections and other programs and plans that were in place prior to September 11th, as well as those that have been beefed up since September 11th, there are a series of steps that have been taken. I think you'll hear additional information about that from the appropriate government agencies.
You said that there was no unusual communications from the cockpit. Can you tell us what your understanding is of the nature of those communications? And are you aware that the pilot declared to ground controllers that he had a mechanical?
No, that's what I mean by no unusual communications. There were no communications in the cockpit at first reports. And again, I want to caution everybody, first reports do change, and we will be looking for additional tapes, any other information that is available. But by all first reports, there were no unusual communications between the cockpit and the tower at JFK or the New York facility that was handed over communications after the plane is departed from the airport area.
Not even an indication that the pilot declared an emergency.
By all first reports, there were no unusual communications between the pilot and communicators either at JFK or at the New York facilities that monitor traffic after it's taken off. We'll let you know if he does.
To follow up to that thought, what does the White House make of the idea that the FAA said that at 9:17 they lost radar and radio contact, which is unusual. So even if there was no unusual communications, the fact that they lost contact with is unusual.
Well, that clearly happened. I mean, that speaks for itself. I mean, an airplane crashed, and when airplanes crash, they go below radar ability to see them, and so you do lose contact. The question was there any unusual contact, not lost contact? Clearly, contact was lost. But were there any conversations between the pilot and any of the towers or the communications facilities that would have indicated any trouble that the pilots were aware of? The answer to that, based on all preliminary reviews, is no.
Ari, where was and where is the Vice President today, and has his location changed because of this event?
No. Prior to this, the Vice President was already at an undisclosed secure location. The Vice President also has been monitoring events. He spoke with the President.
All right. I mean, you've said that it's way too early to talk about the causes, no unusual communications, but has the White House received any details beyond what we've heard the eyewitnesses say?
No, again, I've shared with you as much as I can, and we'll continue to monitor events, monitor facts, and report as we know. I just caution everybody, first reports typically are the reports that change the most. I think you're hearing from people on the ground who are faithfully reporting what they know at this time, what they have seen, what eyewitnesses have reported, and we will continue to update information and provide it as it becomes available. Governor Ridge, by the way, has also spoken with Mayor Giuliani. He did just now. So you can anticipate throughout the day that the White House and federal agencies will stay in very close touch with the people of New York. Peter?
The President, in his conversation with Giuliani made reference in New York to requesting air cover as a precaution. Can you outline for us what decision-making was done on that at this end, and whether the military alert status changed at any time?
And I think the mayor alluded to this as well. Air cover had already been in place over New York and Washington. There were a series of precautions since September 11th across the country that have been in place and remain in place, so that was already present.
He indicated he asked for air cover, so this was not...
It was already present in New York.
Was the military alert status changed at all because of what happened in New York today?
There were, as a result of this, the military, and you may want to talk to them, does have defense cruise fighter capability that they will change the level of in regard to any particular needs, and they did take appropriate defensive measures as quickly as they received word about this. But again, I mentioned that that's something you've also seen since September 11th across the country.
Has the President, Ari, ordered any other actions to take place outside of New York involving air travel, involving any other security measures in the wake of this crash?
No, as you know, the actions taken by the Federal Aviation Administration apply to the 3 New York City airports and the Westchester County Airport.
Assuming that the President ultimately makes those calls, right, based on recommendations from the FAA?
Which calls?
Whether to close down additional airports or do anything?
No, those are decisions that are made by the FAA. That is within their authority, and they act upon their information and take those actions.
Does the President feel comfortable with those decisions, given that what you seem to be saying is that they're based largely on an absence of information? In other words, no threats that have come in, or you're not disputing what other...
Absolutely. That's why I indicated to you that the President said to Mayor Giuliani and Governor Pataki that they took appropriate precautions in the actions that they took. The President feels the same way about the plan that the federal government took.
After September 11th, the President made a great effort to talk about the airlines being safe. He encouraged people to fly. What is his message after today?
The President continues to believe that. You know, I think, again, it's important to wait to see exactly what the facts are and as they develop. But prior to September 11th, accidents took place. We don't yet know what the precise cause of this is. but prior to September 11th, events took place and the public still traveled, accidents took place, and that the President continues to believe that people need to travel, the American people need to get on with their lives, and I think the American people have responded to that. So,
All right.
John, just take a couple more.
Well, that was my question, given the economic difficulties of the airlines. Is he concerned that it's going to be a turn away from the airlines even more?
Well, actually, the facts bear out just the opposite, that the American people are increasingly traveling, increasingly flying, and obviously this just took place a few hours ago, and we'll see how the public responds, but the President's message to the public is that they should still travel, they should still live their full lives. Last question?
All right. If there was evidence of terrorism, you probably would have closed down the airspace already, wouldn't you?
Well, again, I'm not going to speculate beyond anything that I've indicated. And again, the reason for that is because it's always important from the White House point of view at a time like this to exercise maximum caution as first facts are ascertained and reviewed. Information will continue to be shared throughout the investigation as events warrant. You'll continue to hear from other government agencies. There'll be a series of other briefings today. National Transportation Safety Board is going to brief. I know that American Airlines is going to be speaking shortly. So you're going to continue to receive information, and the White House will continue to provide it as well. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Can you talk about Afghanistan again today?
Obviously, that is White House, or was White House spokesman Ari Fleischer talking to reporters in the briefing room of the White House, talking about the crash that occurred this morning, we believe around 9:17, or about 5 miles from John F. Kennedy Airport here in New York. Bob Hager is standing by in our Washington newsroom. Bob, obviously White House officials have to treat this very gingerly and be very careful about jumping to any conclusions, don't they?
Yes, you could tell they're going out of their way to dampen any speculation about the possibility of terrorism, and the fact that they did not. He hinted there for a moment at something that came out a little earlier, that they did give consideration whether to order a nationwide ground halt, such as we had during the events of September 11th, and then they decided against that, and instead they closed the airports right around New York, and now he's saying that they're going to reopen them shortly. At the moment, Newark and JFK and LaGuardia all remain closed, but the small airports around there, like Teterboro and the airports out on Long Island, they have been reopened. But as you say, he did seem to be going out of his way to attempt not to jump to any conclusion that this was an act of terrorism and come down more on the side of mechanical in these very early moments. But we're really working without a whole lot of information.
And Bob, he was pretty quick to refute a statement that we discussed earlier on this broadcast, that a government official had been quoting the FBI as saying that there was an explosion on the airplane. He said there was no such government official, or a government official never made that remark, correct?
Yeah, and it appeared on a wire is where it came from initially.
Right, the Associated Press.
And then everyone quoted it. But then Pete Williams came along later as soon as he got a hold of the Justice Department, and they said, well, no, what they meant was that's what some of the early eyewitness accounts, that it looked like that kind of thing from the
White House, at least, whether there were any distress calls that may have been related to some kind of mechanical failure. Also, Matt, I think it's interesting to point out a new operation in the works here at the White House, and you heard Fleischer go through it. That is headed up by Tom Ridge, who is the Director of Homeland Security. He immediately convened a conference call with all the agencies involved here, including the Department of Defense, the FBI, the Justice Department, the FBI, the FAA, FEMA, and others, to immediately coordinate what information the government had about this crash, specifically in the wake of September 11th, whether there was any evidence to point to terrorist activity. Ari Fleischer, you heard say that there has been no specific credible information that the government has received that points to any kind of threat coinciding with the crash this morning. But as Fleischer mentioned, a lot of this information is still incomplete.
All right, David, thank you very much. David Gregory at the White House this morning. Let's go to Pete Williams, who's in Washington as well. Pete, so we're hearing one thing from the administration officials publicly. Is that the same thing they're saying privately?
Indeed so. Perhaps you could say they said it privately before they said it publicly, which is no indication at this point of terrorism or crime. The FBI is involved along with the NTSB. It's still the NTSB's investigation at this point, but the law enforcement involvement is because of the possibility that there was some kind of an explosion. Now, law enforcement officials emphasize this is not anything that they've developed on their own, but there were some eyewitnesses who said they thought they saw the engines fall off, and of course we've seen the engines on the ground, so obviously they did. but this official says no indication that there was an explosion on the main body of the plane. Now, one other thing, Matt, we were talking about earlier is the possibility that the officials would be going through the list of passengers called the manifest to see if there were any unusual, suspicious people there or any what they call hits, any people who also show up on databases of criminal suspects. We are told now that several law enforcement officials have had access to this manifest, have been asked to go through it, and we're told that the initial check is no hits, no people on board that plane who immediately show up on any law enforcement databases for people who are known drug runners or criminal suspects or people who were on anyone's watch list as suspicious people. So that's not dispositive, but it's one other indication that there's no evidence at this point of a crime, although I think we must emphasize that, as you've been saying, they're still open-minded on what caused this, but they say no evidence of terrorism or a crime at this point.
Right, and until they have concrete evidence of some kind of mechanical failure, they will not close any investigation into a possible crime.
Well, that's absolutely right. I remember how long they kept the issue open with TWA 800, going back and forth about whether it could have been a bomb, finally ruling that out, but it was months before they reached a conclusion there.
All right, Pete Williams in Washington this morning. Pete, to you as well, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Just to relate something on the human side of this terrible story, one of the wires says the Rockaways neighborhood where this happened is still struggling to recover from the events of September 11th. Locals say about 100 people in that neighborhood were killed in the September 11th attacks, and many of those were firefighters. Rudy Giuliani is quoted this morning as saying that he thinks he went to at least 10 funerals at a church near this most recent crash site. So, of course, your heart goes out to all those people in that neighborhood who are still completely shocked by the events of 2 months ago and now are dealing with this situation as well. We're going to talk with Kenneth Quinn. He is a former official with the FAA. Mr. Quinn, good morning.
Good morning.
What are your thoughts in the aftermath of this crash?
Well, it's another terrible tragedy and a blow to aviation. We are hearing some reassuring things in terms of the lack of any specific and credible threats in the intelligence community and a lack of any emergency called out, although as pilots we always learn to navigate first and communicate afterward. But it's without question just a terrible tragedy. We have to figure out what went wrong, why, prevent a reoccurrence, but it sounds like the government is on top of it and they're coordinated in a professional manner, which is also reassuring.
You know, Mr. Quinn, not to refute some of your statements, but there might be a plausible explanation for the two reassuring things you just mentioned. No specific threat. There was no specific threat prior to the World Trade Center, the Dulles International, the Pentagon flight, or this Pennsylvania crash either.
Well, but you did have extensive controller communications. Obviously, we knew some birds were out there in an uncontrolled environment. You would have known that immediately here. Very little time to react here. But certainly, Mr. Fleischer is right. You can't rule anything in or out at this stage. You simply have to get as much forensic evidence, which also, thank God, we'll have more of in this case because it's not over an ocean, it's not in the Everglades. We're going to be able to pick up the flight data recorder, the cockpit voice recorder very quickly and get the controller tapes, the radar tracks, and probably find out what happened here in a fairly short order.
Tell me a little bit about security. I know that you were heavily involved with that issue, or were when you were with the FAA. Can you talk about the increased level of security that would, at least by all appearances, prevent a terrorist act happening?
Yeah, I mean, the system has really been battened down dramatically. And here it's an international flight, so you're going to have even more extraordinary procedures in place. You have 100% X-raying of the checked baggage. You have a positive bag match to each passenger so no one can put their bag on board and not get on board themselves. The FAA has issued, I think, over 66 security directives after September 11th. Magnetometer and X-ray for carry-on baggage has been ratcheted to the most sensitive levels possible. People are getting pat-downs. The whole system is dramatically ratcheted up in the wake of September 11th, which is, again, another reassuring thing. It's obviously no guarantee for safety and security, but 685 million people do fly through the system annually and do so very safely and securely.
Also, I just wanted to ask you, Mr. Quinn, about the fact that there were no distress calls. You find that, in a way, pointing to the possibility of a mechanical problem. Why is that again?
Well, you're taught really to navigate first and then communicate. Distress calls and emergency signals are given out if you have a sufficient period of time to deal with a cockpit emergency or a flight control emergency. But that's not to say that it rules security or safety, mechanical in or out. So I think it's really to a draw. But what we need to do is find out what was happening on board the airplane. You will see blips on the flight data recorder. You'll see the attitude adjustments, and we'll be able to find out probably the origin of the explosion based on the forensic evidence that will be on the ground in this case.
This is a huge blow, obviously, on the human level, but for the aviation industry, no matter what the cause, as we've been saying this morning, this is not the kind of event the airline industry needed at this point in time.
No, it comes in the, right on the eve of the very busy Thanksgiving holiday and Christmas holidays coming up. I still think people, as the White House has indicated, ought to go about their lives. You still have a greater likelihood of being killed in a lightning strike or being kicked by a donkey than in aviation. But these are spectacular images. We have every right to be prudent. The system, though, is reacting very well, I think, to try to make sure that things like this don't happen. A decade before this was a remarkable decade of great safety record and performance. American Airlines is a great airline. They have great flight crews, great maintenance procedures, and the FAA has done a very commendable job recently to make sure things like this don't happen. But sometimes tragedies do occur. As long as human beings are involved in the technology and in flying them and in maintaining them and providing securities, mistakes can happen, but we ought not to blow this out of proportion or hold the whole country hostage because of one tragedy.
All right, Kenneth Quinn, former chief counsel with the FAA. Mr. Quinn, thanks very much.
Thank you, Katie.
Katie, let's go out to the Rockaways now, where Ann Curry has made her way near the crash site. Ann?
Hey, Matt, I'm just a few blocks away, and just a few minutes ago, Mayor Rudolph Giuliani returned from having seen the scene of this disaster by air and also by foot. He said it is remarkable that the plane fell in a very confined area and that it appears that it went straight down. He said the plane is not intact, that part of the plane, an entire wing or a portion of it, is in the bay, and that the rest of the parts of the plane are on Rockaway, and that there is an engine. He said he confirmed it to be an engine, fell on 129th Street. It looked like it went straight down on a gas station. I actually saw the piece of the plane. I couldn't describe it as an engine, but he confirmed it to be one of the engines. He also said that 4 homes were completely destroyed. Another 4 homes were damaged, and another 12 to 14 homes were impacted. We were hearing from the fire commissioner that this covers basically a 12 square block area. The fires, according to the mayor, are contained but not under control. We're also hearing from the mayor that they're covering as many bodies as they can. He said people should not speculate on the cause of this disaster. He said, however, that the city is on the highest state of alert. We asked him, of course, if he knew about any casualties on the ground. He said he does not know of any casualties on the ground. An ominous sign, though, Matt. I counted at least 30 ambulances, majority of them, the vast majority of them, waiting. And the fire commissioner told me that they're not finding any bodies of injured people. So that is the latest from the scene, Matt. Back to you. I'll try to get a lot closer.
All right, Ann, thank you very much. We had heard from Peninsula Hospital earlier that they were treating about 15 people. Those were mostly neighborhood people, and they were being treated for smoke inhalation. So we still have no word, as Ann mentioned, on casualties.
Right, there were minor injuries, smoke inhalation, abrasions, the like, from people, I guess, who might have been in the neighborhood when some of this transpired.
Along Van Wyck Boulevard Expressway is Jamaica Hospital, which I think is a level 1 trauma center. And I don't think they've seen anybody other than maybe a couple of minor injuries there.
Let's go down to Washington, where NBC's Bob Hager apparently has some new information.
Just a little bit on how this plane had taken off and so forth. I made a crude drawing here, which I think will show up. This is Kennedy Airport. These are the 222 runways. The plane was taking off here from 22 left. Now, this is the ocean out here. So it was coming off in this direction, and it made a turn up to the north on takeoff. That was planned. So it's coming around this way, and it's going to go down here to head south for the Dominican Republic. And he climbed out to 2,300 feet, we're hearing, and he had given permission to get up to 13,000 feet. So the accident would have occurred out in here somewhere just 4 minutes after takeoff, and it was 5 miles out from the airport. Let me confirm again the altitude. I think I said 2,300 feet. It was at 2,800 feet. But in any event, he was not very far then up in the air and off the runway. He had already switched. You talked first to departure control, the air traffic controller at Kennedy, and then once off the end of the runway, you very quickly switched to what's called the New York TRACON, which manages the traffic for all 3 airports in the New York area. He had made his switch. He was talking to New York TRACON. Moments later, he would have switched to what they call New York Center, which covers several states. It's a much broader area of the country. But he crashed while he was on with the TRACON, so that's that intermediate radio. And again, we're hearing that there was no call to indicate distress and no Mayday call. That at least is the first report. Now, sometimes that too changes. You hear that at first, and then later it turns out he did get off a Mayday. But at the moment, we've heard from several different places that they did not get off a call.
Bob, I'm just curious. Now, we've talked all morning about it is possible to pilot a plane with one engine, but because of the altitude level, is that what would make that so problematic in terms of maintaining control of the aircraft?
It's just a very tricky maneuver, because if you have, let's say you've got a left engine here and a right engine here, and this engine all of a sudden isn't giving you any thrust, so all the thrust is on this side of the aircraft. Here's the fuselage in the middle. It wants to pull the nose over this way because the thrust is coming from this side. You have to take counter steps to control that, either with the surfaces of the wing to try to pull the plane back so that it stays on center, or you can use the rudder in the back on the tail. But it all has to be managed very carefully. Again, pilots do it in a simulator all the time. If you take the percentages of things that can go wrong in an aircraft, an engine out situation is one of the higher percentage failures that can occur, and that's why they practice for it so often. And then we did talk about the fact that if you get a seizure of the engine, it completely locks up. The engine is designed so that it'll snap off, and that aircraft is supposed to be able to fly even with the whole engine missing, just the one engine on the other side.
But Bob, I would think if you were at a higher altitude, it would at least give you a little more wiggle room to kind of to get control of the aircraft without it having a terrible result.
Absolutely. So the fact that he's only at 2,800 feet, you're just seconds away from the ground at that point. So very, very little time to deal with whatever kind of catastrophic emergency he had there. But also, if a whole engine came off and he had flames, I mean, eyewitnesses are reporting flames. I mean, it was a very grim scenario that must have presented itself. By the way, sometimes in the cockpit, you can't see that engine back there. He might not know precisely. I mean, he's got the instruments, he or she got the instruments in front of them to tell him that something is drastically wrong back there, but wouldn't be able to eyeball it and know precisely what was wrong.
It sounds like whatever happened, Bob, happened in a matter of seconds, though.
And with a full load of fuel, which is volatile and bursts into flame. And you're right, the fact that he doesn't get off any kind of call, and if radio and radar contact are lost so instantly, it suggests that there may have been some catastrophic kind of severing there of lines and things that blew the plane's electronics as well.
All right, Bob Hager, Bob in Washington, D.C. Bob, thanks so much.
I guess we should recap for people who may just be tuning in. It is 12:44 on the East Coast. It's 9:44 out west. And early this morning at about 9:15 East Coast time, American Airlines flight 587 from JFK Airport in New York to the Dominican Republic, Santo Domingo, crashed only about 5 miles south of the airport. We're being told 255 people were on board that plane, 246 of those passengers, 9 crew members. As you heard Bob Hager just say, it doesn't appear the pilot got off any kind of Mayday call, and the plane went down in a populated area of Queens known as the Rockaways. It totally destroyed 4 houses, damaged many others. As you can see some of the footage from earlier of the flames burning. No reports of survivors at the moment. Also no reports of any casualties on the ground, although again this plane did come down on top of several houses.
I understand from Ann's report, she's at the scene, that a total of 8 houses were affected by this.
And 12 to 13 more were damaged somewhat by debris and that sort of activity.
According to eyewitnesses,
Yes.
at least 2 of those houses were completely destroyed.
Right.
And obviously it's a horrific scene. This being Veterans Day, many people were off, which we don't know what to make of that at this point in time. You know, you hope that people are out of their house and at work, or the kids are at school, but it's just unclear what was going on in that neighborhood when this happened.
This has been a constant battle between folks who live in the neighborhood associations and the Port Authority about the flight paths of a lot of these jets, and the worst case scenario being this happening. There was a crash at JFK probably about 25 years ago, and you know, they cut right across Rockaway Boulevard, and people said, as long as you keep flying these jets in here, we have the possibility of this happening. And this is, of course, everybody's worst nightmare come true.
Meanwhile, officials, of course, are being very, very careful about determining the cause of this. Just 2 months and a day following the World Trade Center attacks, obviously terrorism is something that people think about, but White House officials are taking great pains to say that they are open-minded. They have no indication this is a terrorist event. And at this point, it seems that they're leaning toward some kind of mechanical problem.
But as a precaution, they immediately closed the 3 major airports in this area. They also closed bridges and tunnels in and around New York City. The subway system, from what I understand, was shut down for a time. I'm not sure if that is back up and running. But obviously people and officials in this city wanted to be safe and not sorry, given the fact that the last time we were all talking about something like this, 18 minutes after the first incident, we were reporting on a second incident, and immediately we realized it was no longer an accident.
And of course, we mentioned earlier, but I think it bears repeating, that this neighborhood, this community has suffered tremendously already as a result of the September 11th attacks. About 100 people in the Rockaways were killed, and this community is still struggling with that. And of course, now they're having to deal with a whole different set of circumstances, or it's unclear what they're dealing with, but it's just a terrible, terrible blow to this community. Many of the people who lost their lives were firefighters. We talked to a retired New York City police officer who lost his son, who was with Kenner Fitzgerald. So very, very difficult day.
Let's go back down to Washington and NBC's Pete Williams, our justice correspondent. Pete?
Matt, officials tell us here that the FBI now has about 200 agents working this case already, and one of the things they're doing is talking to the ground crews who helped to load the plane to see if they saw anything suspicious, anyone around the plane who shouldn't have been there, and that is just starting up now, so we don't know what conclusions have been reached from there.
All right, Pete, let me interrupt you for a second, because we have a press conference getting underway now with the spokesperson from American Airlines.
This morning, Al Becker of our corporate communications department will stay behind and provide a little more detail than I'm going to be able to. Well, obviously, it's an incredibly sad day. Nothing grieves me more than to report to you that this morning an American Airlines flight was lost in New York. I will be leaving for New York immediately to lead the American Airlines care team that is responding to today's accident. Our primary concern will be to provide support to the families of our passengers and our employees that were lost today. And to all of our employees and to all of the people on the ground in New York. At this time, we have absolutely no indication of what caused the accident. We have moved quickly to help organize the response and to support the investigation. Toward that end, I have already been in touch this morning with Andrew Card at the White House and with Mayor Giuliani and Governor Pataki in New York, as well as numerous officials in Santo Domingo. Let me just provide some basic facts about the flight today. It was American Airlines Flight 587, an Airbus A300 aircraft en route from New York Kennedy to Santo Domingo. The airplane was lost today shortly after takeoff from Kennedy Airport. And the preliminary passenger list indicated the aircraft carried 246 passengers and 9 crew members. Family members that wish to receive information about passengers may contact American Airlines at our toll-free number at 1-800-245-0999. As you would imagine, today's news comes at a difficult time for the nation, a difficult time for the airline industry, and a very difficult time for American Airlines. Given the changed world we live in today, it will be as important as it has ever been to quickly and to accurately determine the cause of this accident. First and foremost, however, our thoughts and our prayers are with the families of our passengers and employees of those lost today. As I said a moment ago, I will be leaving immediately from Dallas-Fort Worth to New York. Let me just turn you over, as I said at the outset, to Al Becker of our Corporate Communication Department with a little bit of additional information. Al?
Ladies and gentlemen, I have just a little bit of additional information for you about the aircraft itself. This airplane was an Airbus Industry A300-600. American has a total of 35 A300s in its fleet, including the aircraft that we lost today. The aircraft was built in Toulouse, France. The tail number of the airplane is N as in Nelly 14053. And the aircraft entered service with American Airlines as a brand new aircraft on July 12th of 1988. A little bit of the maintenance background and history on the airplane. There are a series of major maintenance steps that an airplane goes through, as many of you may know. This aircraft had its last A check on November 11th this year. It had its last B check, which is a somewhat heavier maintenance check, on October 3rd of this year, and its last main base visit for a major overhaul was on December 9th, of 1999, and it was scheduled for a major main base visit in July of 2002. The aircraft had two General Electric CF6-80C 2A5 engines. And the time on the number one engine on board that airplane had 694 hours since its last overhaul. The number two engine, which is the right engine, had 9,788 hours since its last overhaul. And an engine will typically have a major overhaul every 10,000 hours. The last time the number two engine was in for a shop inspection was 2,887 hours ago. That is all of the detailed information that we have available to you at this moment. As Mr. Carty mentioned, we are in contact with and are working closely with all the federal authorities involved in this investigation. As more information becomes available, we will make that available to you. You are welcome to stay here with us, and we will provide you with whatever updates we have at that time. Really do not. No, at this point we do not. We are really just in the opening phases of this investigation. Obviously, it will be a very exhaustive one. Typically, the National Transportation Safety Board has full responsibility for the investigation. American Airlines is working very closely with the NTSB, but we really do not have any information that relate to the accident at all. Jim? I have no idea. I really don't. I have no information on that. I would any questions that you might have that would relate to the explicit investigation itself, we simply must refer back to the NTSB. We really do not. Jim? We're ascertaining that right now. We have not released information about the crew. We hope to be able to do that soon. We have not released that information yet.
Can you give us a TikTok perhaps
transpired? What Mr. Carty was doing and speaking with Giuliani?
Well, he did have all those conversations. He was in the office this morning, obviously, and there were a number of major figures that Mr. Carty talked to, but it obviously is a very, very tragic and sad event, and there was just a tremendous amount of activity in here this morning, and part of which is centered around the care team that will be leaving momentarily to go work with the families of those involved in this accident. I'm going to have to leave you with that, ladies and gentlemen. Again, as I said to you earlier...
We've been listening, of course, to the Director of Communications for American Airlines following the CEO, Mr. Donald Carty, talking about what a tragedy this was and what a sad day it is, not only for the country, but for American Airlines and for the airline industry, which is already beleaguered in the aftermath of the September 11th attacks. But Mr. Carty was quick to point out that their thoughts and prayers were with family members who may have lost their lives, and of course, members of the American Airlines family. There were 9 crew members aboard Flight 587 and 246 passengers. He was also quick to detail the maintenance record of this particular airplane, which is an A300-600, which is an Airbus. Bob Hager in Washington, anything strike you in terms of this airplane's maintenance record that's out of the ordinary?
Nothing that really jumps out. I thought it was interesting, he's talking about the 2 engines and the left-hand engine, and these early reports may be wrong, but it's the left side of the plane that many of the first eyewitness reports say there's appear to be some problem on that side, and the engine that's separated there that you're looking at may be the left engine. Well, that was the one that had been overhauled not very long ago. The other one on the right side was getting near the time when it needed another major overhaul. They go in every couple of years for an overhaul. The big maintenance check on this plane, the one where they tear it all apart and go through it with a fine-tooth comb, had occurred about 1.5 years ago, so that's fairly recently, and it had its A check. If I took the dates down correctly, that's just a sort of a little ramp quick check, but I think it had that on this very day, or yesterday it was.
Yeah, that's right, November 11th, and then the B check, which is, I guess, is a more thorough check on October 3rd.
That's a sort of an overnight check, yeah. So both of those are fairly recent. And then the age of the aircraft, 14 years old, manufactured back in 1988. Am I